Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now let's dive into today's story. Title: Caught my wife cheating with a family friend. She begged for another chance, so I wiped out her years of work instead. Daniel, 38. A self-made architect who founded his own successful design firm, Urban Visions, in Boston. Known for his meticulous nature and sharp attention to detail, Daniel has built a reputation for designing high-profile commercial spaces. Reserved and family-oriented, he poured his energy into both his family and business, trusting that his marriage with Hannah was unbreakable. Hannah, 34. Daniel's wife, a well-known interior decorator with a knack for turning dull spaces into works of art. She owns a boutique design studio, Luxus Spaces, which has grown considerably thanks to her networking skills and charismatic personality. Social and slightly flirtatious, Hannah enjoys the attention her job brings her, and she often collaborates with close friends and clients on her projects. Alex, 39. A longtime family friend and chef with his own restaurant in Boston, the Copper Pot. Often working with Hannah on event planning for her clients, Alex is charming and approachable, making him a popular figure in their social circle. Daniel once trusted Alex as a close friend, frequently inviting him over for family dinners and gatherings. Daniel prided himself on being a reasonable man, never one to jump to conclusions. Over the years, he had built his marriage with Hannah on what he believed to be a solid foundation of trust, mutual respect, and unwavering loyalty. They had weathered their fair share of storms, and he had no reason to believe that anything could ever come between them. But in recent months, something about Hannah's behavior had shifted, and it nagged at him, refusing to be ignored. Her work hours had extended, often running late into the night. While her job as an interior decorator occasionally required long hours, she had never been so secretive about her work. Daniel started noticing other changes, too. Hannah's phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter or on the bedside table, was now always within her reach, its screen turned down and set to silent. She would often step out of the room whenever it buzzed, her laughter filtering in from a distance, leaving Daniel feeling increasingly isolated. The alarm bells grew louder one evening during a dinner party when Daniel saw a familiar name flash on Hannah's phone screen: Alex. Daniel's longtime friend and Hannah's frequent collaborator for events. The message seemed harmless at first, but when Hannah noticed Daniel looking, she quickly turned her phone over, her face a mask of forced nonchalance. Daniel's mind began to churn with unease. He reminded himself not to jump to conclusions. After all, they had been friends with Alex for years, frequently inviting him over for family dinners and social gatherings. But the small changes, the guarded conversations, and her increasingly vague explanations started building up, forming a picture he didn't want to acknowledge. He spent several sleepless nights afterward, his thoughts consumed with the small signs he'd observed, piecing together fragments that only deepened his suspicions. Though he tried to convince himself he was being paranoid, his intuition told him something was wrong. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it continued to grow, casting a shadow over their once happy life. Determined to bring back some closeness, Daniel suggested a weekend getaway. They hadn't taken a trip together in months, and he thought that some quality time away from work and responsibilities might help ease the tension between them. When he proposed the idea, he expected Hannah to be excited, or at least open to the thought of spending a weekend away. But to his disappointment, she hesitated, claiming she had an important event she couldn't miss. Her excuse felt hollow, and her lack of enthusiasm stung more than he expected. A sense of helplessness settled over Daniel as he watched her turn down the idea. He felt as though he was losing grip on something precious, slipping through his fingers despite his efforts to hold on. That night, Daniel lay awake, the realization hitting him that if he didn't confront his suspicions, they would consume him. He knew he needed answers, clear, undeniable proof to either confirm or dispel the doubts that were tearing him apart. The following day, he devised a plan. He told Hannah he had an unexpected business trip out of town and wouldn't be back until the end of the weekend. She barely questioned him, her attention already elsewhere, which only deepened his resolve. He arranged for his team to cover for him, packed a bag to keep up the pretense, and left early, making sure Hannah saw him go. But instead of heading to the airport, he checked into a hotel nearby, setting himself up to observe from a safe distance. The weight of his decision settled heavily on him. He hated the idea of spying on his wife, but he needed answers. He was at a breaking point, driven by the relentless need to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Daniel sat in his car, parked a short distance from the Copper Pot, Alex's restaurant. His heart pounded with a mix of dread and adrenaline, the thought of what he might find making his pulse race. He had been tracking Hannah's location, a decision he wrestled with but ultimately justified in his need for the truth. As he waited, he wondered if he was making a mistake, if he would regret uncovering whatever lay hidden beneath the surface. Yet he couldn't bring himself to leave. Just as doubt crept in, his phone chimed. A notification from the tracking app indicating that Hannah had arrived at the Copper Pot. Taking a deep breath, Daniel entered the restaurant, scanning the dimly lit interior until he saw them. Hannah and Alex sat in a secluded booth, their faces close together, whispering and laughing like two people sharing a private world. The sight made his stomach turn. He felt like an intruder, but the pain of betrayal rooted him in place, unable to look away. From his vantage point, he watched as Alex reached across the table, his hand lingering on Hannah's in a way that was unmistakably intimate. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned closer, her laughter soft and private, the way she used to laugh with him. In that moment, reality crashed over Daniel like a wave, pulling him under. The betrayal was painfully clear. He had hoped, despite his suspicions, that he was wrong, that he was imagining things. But here it was, undeniable and brutal. Every detail of the scene, the closeness, the soft laughter, the lingering touches, confirmed what he had feared. The hurt transformed into a simmering anger, his mind reeling from the shock and betrayal. As he watched them, a sense of numbness overtook him, as if he was watching a movie, detached from the pain. But deep down, the hurt burned, leaving a scar that he knew would never fully heal. The anger and betrayal from the restaurant followed him like a dark cloud as he tracked them to a nearby hotel. Daniel had parked across the street, waiting as Hannah and Alex checked in. He felt like a shadow, silently observing their every move, each action driving the knife deeper. Part of him wanted to storm in, confront them on the spot, and demand answers. But he waited, letting the full weight of the situation sink in, allowing himself to absorb the pain and transform it into a cold resolve. Once he was certain they were alone in the hotel room, he made his move. He entered the hotel, taking the elevator to their floor, and stood in front of their room. He knocked, and when Hannah opened the door, her face went white. Her shock mirrored his own internal turmoil, but he remained outwardly calm, refusing to let her see the depth of his pain. Alex, too, looked horrified, stumbling over his words in a poor attempt at an apology before quickly excusing himself, leaving Daniel and Hannah alone. Hannah's initial shock gave way to tears as she fell to her knees, begging him for forgiveness. She tried to explain, her voice shaking as she insisted it was a momentary lapse, a mistake she regretted deeply. But Daniel felt nothing but a cold emptiness, her words falling on deaf ears. He realized then that there was nothing she could say that would change what he had seen, nothing that could erase the betrayal. Her pleas only strengthened his resolve, igniting a dark desire for retribution. If she had been willing to throw away their life together for a fleeting thrill, then he would make sure she paid the price, right where it would hurt her the most, her career. After that confrontation, Daniel pretended to forgive Hannah, convincing her that he wanted to rebuild their marriage, hoping she would believe him. His act was convincing. He played the role of a supportive husband, giving her comfort and encouragement as she expressed remorse and regret. Inside, though, he was already plotting his revenge, coldly calculating how to dismantle the life she valued most, her career. He knew the time and effort she had invested in Luxa Spaces, the boutique design studio she had nurtured from the ground up. That was where he would strike. With access to her business files and contacts, Daniel started his quiet sabotage. Over the next few weeks, he planted the seeds of chaos, making subtle yet damaging changes. He sent emails under her name to her most loyal clients, subtly offending them with rude responses and careless mistakes. He deleted important client contacts, rescheduled meetings without informing her, and mixed up orders, causing confusion and frustration. Clients started to lose faith in her reliability, and her reputation suffered. As her studio's social media manager, he posted insensitive replies to comments and neglected her brand's presence, letting negative reviews pile up. Hannah, oblivious to his interference, became increasingly stressed, struggling to keep her business afloat amidst the mounting issues. She couldn't understand why her once loyal clients were leaving, why her reputation was deteriorating, or why she was losing control over her business. Every frustrated sigh, every sleepless night she endured only fueled Daniel's resolve. Watching her life unravel, he felt a grim satisfaction, knowing she was facing the consequences of her betrayal. Daniel observed Hannah's descent into despair with a detached satisfaction. She was a shadow of her former self, her once confident demeanor replaced by an anxious, frazzled exterior. He noticed how she paced the living room at odd hours, frantically calling clients to apologize, trying to salvage the remnants of her career. Her energy was consumed by her desperation to fix the damage, but it was like trying to hold water in her hands. The harder she tried, the more everything slipped away. She confided in him about her struggles, tearfully sharing her frustrations and fears of losing everything she had worked for. Daniel, hiding his satisfaction, would listen patiently, offering hollow words of encouragement and advice, knowing they would do little to stem the tide of her downfall. He could see the toll it was taking on her, the bags under her eyes, the way she jumped at every phone call, expecting more bad news. He watched her crumble, knowing he was the architect of her destruction, and he felt vindicated. Each tear she shed felt like justice, a repayment for the trust and love she had so carelessly thrown away. Eventually, the stress and frustration pushed Hannah to question whether someone was deliberately sabotaging her business. Her suspicions grew, and she couldn't shake the feeling that someone close might be responsible. In a final confrontation, she accused Daniel, her voice filled with anger and desperation. Her accusations, however, were met with an icy calm. Daniel didn't deny it. Instead, he revealed the full extent of his revenge, recounting the moment he had caught her with Alex and explaining how he had systematically dismantled her business in retribution. The shock and betrayal on her face mirrored his own emotions from that fateful day. She was left speechless, her expression one of horror as she realized the depth of his betrayal. She begged him to stop, to help her salvage what was left of her business, but Daniel remained unmoved. His love had turned to ashes, and there was nothing left for him to give. He had repaid her betrayal with equal measure, ensuring she felt the same sense of loss and devastation. Hannah's life lay in ruins, her career destroyed, her reputation in tatters. With no hope of salvaging her business, she packed her belongings, leaving the home they had once shared with a heavy heart. Daniel watched her go, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Part of him mourned the love they once had, but he knew that the person he had loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who had shattered his world. His revenge was complete, leaving him with a bittersweet sense of closure. He had exacted his justice, but in the end, he had lost her and the life they had built together. Thank you for watching this intense story of love, betrayal, and retribution. What would you have done in Daniel's place? Do you think he went too far, or was his revenge justified? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Until next time, thanks for watching. Remember, every action has consequences.
It all started on a calm Saturday morning. I had barely poured myself a cup of coffee when my phone rang. It was my parents, letting me know they wanted to visit on Sunday, just to check in and spend some time with us. Being the straightforward man I am, I immediately agreed and told them it was a great idea. Family is important to me, and I figured a quiet Sunday at home with my parents sounded perfect. After hanging up, I told my wife about it. She didn't seem to mind, simply saying, "Okay, that's fine," and went back to whatever she was doing. For me, it was just another normal start to the weekend. Later that afternoon, something odd happened. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard her phone ring. The sound itself wasn't unusual, but her reaction was. She practically jumped out of her chair, as if the call were some emergency. Before I could even ask what was going on, she darted toward the kitchen with her phone in hand. That kind of urgency was enough to catch my attention, so I got up and followed her. When I got closer, I could hear her speaking in a hushed voice. She wasn't just being quiet, she was whispering so softly I could barely make out a word. I leaned on the doorframe and asked, "What's going on?" "Who's calling?" She gave me a quick glance, waved her hand dismissively, and mouthed, "Later." That didn't sit right with me. What could be so secretive that she had to whisper like that? I stood there for a moment, debating whether to press the issue, but decided to let it go. She'd explain herself eventually. Or at least, I hoped she would. For now, I returned to the living room, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something strange was unfolding. The conversation didn't end quickly, either. She stayed on the phone for nearly an hour. An entire hour of whispering. By the time she finally hung up, I was no longer just curious, I was irritated. What the hell was that about? I asked as soon as she reappeared. "Who on earth were you talking to for that long, and why were you whispering?" She looked at me with that casual, unbothered expression that drives me up the wall sometimes and said, "Oh, that was about tomorrow. We're going to have some guests." That set me off. "What do you mean, guests?" "My parents are coming over tomorrow." "Did you forget about that?" I could feel my temper rising, though I kept my tone steady. Her reply didn't help. "Yeah, I know. But these are secret guests," she said, as if that explained anything. "Secret guests?" I repeated, now genuinely annoyed. "You're kidding, right? Who are these people, and why are they coming here of all places? Did you even think to tell me before agreeing to this?" She sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable, and said, "They're friends of mine." "Well, sort of. I met this woman online a couple of weeks ago on a forum about hobbies and fun stuff, and we really hit it off. She and her husband are coming to visit. They're unique. And they've got something big they want to share. Oh, and they're bringing us a special gift." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight. Two complete strangers you met on the internet are coming to our house to sit with my parents, and you think this is a good idea?" My voice was calm, but the anger was bubbling beneath the surface. She nodded, unflinching. "It's not that big of a deal. I've already invited them, so it's happening. You'll see, it'll be fine." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had already made the decision without consulting me, and now I was supposed to just go along with it? My jaw tightened as I fixed her with a hard stare. I didn't say another word. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there. In my head, all I could think was, who the hell are these people, and how is this supposed to work? I had a sinking feeling this wasn't going to end well. Sunday arrived, and with it came my parents. As expected, they were punctual, dressed in their usual conservative attire, bringing along a homemade pie and their usual warm but formal demeanor. My parents are the kind of people who value tradition and propriety above all else, and I've always respected that about them. As they settled into our living room, I could tell they were glad to be here, and I hoped it would be a peaceful afternoon. I kept glancing at my wife, silently praying that her secret guests would find some reason not to show up. Maybe they'd forget, or maybe the universe would intervene in some miraculous way to spare me the headache. The first hour passed smoothly enough. My mom complimented the curtains, my dad asked me about work, and my wife seemed content, even cheerful. It was a rare moment of calm. But, as if the universe had heard my earlier thoughts and decided to spite me, the doorbell rang. The sound shattered the peace like a rock through a window. My father glanced at me and asked, "Are you expecting someone else?" Before I could respond, my wife was already halfway to the door. "Oh, I forgot to mention," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral, "you're not the only guests we'll have today." My father raised an eyebrow, the lines on his forehead deepening. He's a man of few words, but that look spoke volumes. My mother, ever the picture of composure, sat up straighter, clearly intrigued, but not yet alarmed. Meanwhile, I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. When I turned to see who was at the door, I nearly lost my composure. There they were, the secret guests my wife had been so eager to host. The woman wore pink tights, a miniskirt that looked like it belonged in a high school wardrobe, and a crop top that barely covered anything. Her husband wasn't much better, with his long hair, ripped jeans, and a t-shirt featuring some obscure rock band. They looked completely out of place, like characters from a bad sitcom. My wife greeted them with a sparkle in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She looked thrilled, as if royalty had just arrived. Meanwhile, I turned to my mom and saw her pale visibly. My dad's expression shifted from curiosity to something closer to disbelief. Before I could even react, the guest stepped inside, carrying a large, brightly wrapped gift. They introduced themselves cheerfully, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. My wife ushered them into the living room, where they placed the gift on the coffee table and announced, "We brought something special for you all." The moment my wife began unwrapping the gift, I knew it was a mistake. Inside was a collection of items that I won't describe in detail, but let's just say they were anything but appropriate for a family gathering. My father's jaw tightened, and my mother looked like she might faint. I grabbed the box, muttered a terse thanks, and carried it out of the room before the situation could get any worse. I placed it in the hallway, far from everyone's view, and returned to find an awkward silence hanging in the air. We all sat down, and my father, ever the disciplinarian, tried to make polite conversation. But it was clear that things were already spiraling. The guests, oblivious to the tension, smiled and whispered to each other, completely at ease. Then came the moment that sealed the disaster. The man from the couple leaned forward and said, "Remember how we talked about making a big announcement?" My wife nodded eagerly. "Well," the man continued, "we've decided to open up our marriage, and we thought this would be the perfect time to share that with everyone." The room erupted. My father, who'd been holding his tongue all evening, could no longer contain himself. "That's not openness," he said sharply. "That's adultery. Plain and simple." The debate quickly escalated into a full-blown argument, with voices rising and tempers flaring. My mother, who hates confrontation, sat frozen, clutching the armrest like a lifeline. The guests tried to defend their lifestyle, but my father wasn't having any of it. At one point, he stood up and said, "If I were your age, I'd have knocked some sense into you by now. But I'm smarter than that, so we're leaving." I escorted my parents to the door, apologizing profusely as my father gave me a look I'll never forget. It was the kind of look that says, "You've really screwed up this time." No words were necessary. The shame hit me like a ton of bricks. After they left, I stood at the door for a moment, staring out into the night, wondering how this day had gone so disastrously wrong. Then, with a heavy sigh, I turned and walked back inside, bracing myself for whatever was to come next. My wife had brought the box back into the living room, and I couldn't believe my eyes as she started pulling out its contents and lining them up on the coffee table. It was bad enough that my parents had witnessed this circus the day before, but now she was treating it like a display at a trade show. I stood there for a moment, watching in disbelief, before turning to the couple who had just finished making themselves comfortable on our couch. "You couldn't have waited until another time, maybe told us privately. This whole thing was poorly timed as it is, and you've managed to make it worse by showing up on the same day as my parents." My tone was firm, leaving no room for ambiguity. Instead of taking the hint, my wife shot me a glare. "Stop ruining what's already ruined," she snapped. "You're not making things any better by harping on it." Her defiance was startling. Before I could respond, she grabbed my arm and dragged me into the kitchen. "We need to talk," I said through clenched teeth. She folded her arms and waited. "This can't go on. You've invited people into our home without consulting me, they caused a massive fight with my parents, and now you're defending them like this is all normal. This needs to stop." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "You're overreacting. Things will settle down. Let's just get through the evening." I could feel my patience wearing thin, but I decided not to escalate things further. For the rest of the evening, I kept my distance, though my thoughts raced non-stop. What kind of mess had she dragged us into? I couldn't understand how she was so comfortable with everything that had happened. Later, as we sat in strained silence, I decided to address the practical matter of their stay. "When are you planning to leave?" I asked the couple directly. For once, they seemed caught off guard. The husband exchanged a look with his wife before responding, "Well, we were actually hoping to stay here for a while. You know, just until we get back on our feet." His casual tone made it sound as if this was a perfectly reasonable request. I stared at them, then at my wife, waiting for her to shut this idea down. To my shock, she said, "Of course you can stay. We have plenty of room." My stomach dropped. Was she serious? I managed to keep my composure but couldn't stop myself from thinking, this is unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. The couple wasted no time making themselves at home. They went to take a shower, together, of course, and I turned to my wife, finally letting my frustration show. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, my voice low but intense. First, they completely disrupted things with my parents. Then, they decided they'd just stay here without even asking properly. And now you're letting them walk all over us. I have work tomorrow, and you'll be the one dealing with them. She shrugged dismissively. Your parents are too sensitive. It's not my fault they overreacted. And what's wrong with being hospitable? They needed a place to stay, and we have space. Her nonchalance was infuriating, but before I could argue further, she added, besides, tomorrow is going to be great. When you get home, you'll see. You'll love it. That night, we went to bed, leaving the couple to sleep on the couch in the living room. Also, I thought. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by noises coming from the other side of the house. At first, I tried to ignore it, hoping they'd quiet down. But it only got louder. I couldn't believe it when I realized what they were doing. Right there, in our living room. I lay there, fuming, unable to sleep, and knowing full well that tomorrow was going to be an even bigger disaster. In the morning, as I got ready for work, I turned to my wife and said, if this kind of thing happens again, I'm throwing them out. I don't care how it looks or what they say. They're out. She waved me off like it was nothing. Oh, stop being so dramatic. By tonight, you'll feel differently. Just wait and see. You'll come around. Her confidence only made me more uneasy, but I didn't have the energy to argue. Instead, I left for work, already dreading what I'd come home to. Leaving for work that morning, I tried to push the tension from the previous night out of my mind. I focused on the tasks ahead, hoping the day would provide some relief from the chaos at home. By the time I returned that evening, I was mentally exhausted and eager for a quiet dinner. But as I approached the house, the thumping bass of loud music greeted me before I even reached the door. My heart sank. This couldn't be real. Surely, I thought, I'd walked into someone else's nightmare. But no, it was my house. My sanctuary. And it was hosting a party I hadn't approved. Opening the door, I was met with a scene that could only be described as madness. Strangers were everywhere, spilling drinks, laughing loudly, and dancing without a care in the world. Some of my friends were there too, looking out of place and uncomfortable. One of them approached me as soon as I stepped inside. "Hey, man," he said, his voice low. "I don't know whose idea this was, but it's not what I expected. There's some guy walking around pitching open marriage to people. It's weird." My blood boiled. "Where's my wife?" I asked, my voice clipped. He shrugged. "Haven't seen her in a while. Honestly, we were about to leave. This whole thing feels off." That was all I needed to hear. I pushed through the crowd, scanning faces and dodging spilled drinks, trying to find her. Strangers stared at me, but I ignored them, focused on my mission. After searching the downstairs rooms and finding no sign of her, I headed upstairs, dreading what I might find. My heart pounded as I checked each room. Finally, in the bedroom, I found her. She was sprawled across the bed, deeply asleep and clearly drunk. The sight made my stomach churn. This was my wife, the woman I'd vowed to build a life with, and here she was, passed out in the middle of a disaster she had likely facilitated. I stormed back downstairs and called for everyone's attention. "Party's over," I announced. "Get out. Now." Some people laughed, thinking I was joking, but I wasn't in the mood to argue. I said, "Get out." I bellowed. My friends backed me up, helping to usher the guests out the door. Bottles clinked as they were knocked over, and chairs scraped against the floor as people scrambled to leave. Within minutes, the house was empty, except for the couple who had started all of this. The husband of the pair had the audacity to approach me. "Look," he began, "we didn't mean for things to get out of hand. We're really sorry, but we've got nowhere else to go. Our landlord kicked us out, and we thought we could stay here for a bit while we figure things out." I stared at him, barely containing my anger. "That's not my problem. You've overstayed your welcome, and you've crossed every possible line. Get out. Now." They tried to argue, but I wasn't listening. My patience had run out. I said, "Out." Defeated, they finally gathered their things and left, muttering apologies that meant nothing to me. Once the door closed behind them, I let out a long breath and looked around at the wreckage. The house was a mess, empty bottles and food wrappers everywhere, sticky floors, and a couch that smelled like spilled beer. I grabbed a trash bag and started cleaning up, too wound up to sit still. As I worked, my mind raced. How had it come to this? How had my home, my life, been turned upside down in such a short amount of time? I couldn't avoid the inevitable confrontation with my wife. She would have to answer for this, for the chaos, for the strangers, for the couple who had so shamelessly imposed on us. And most of all, for keeping me in the dark about everything. Who were these people? What was their story? And why had she let them into our lives without telling me the truth? As I tossed another broken bottle into the trash bag, I knew one thing for certain: we were going to have a serious conversation, and it wouldn't be a pleasant one. I woke up feeling worse than I had the night before. The stress, the lack of sleep, and the disaster of the past few days had finally caught up to me. My head throbbed, and my body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. I called in sick and decided to take the day to regroup. As I shuffled out of bed, I realized the house was eerily quiet. My wife was nowhere to be found. Her side of the bed was cold, and there was no sign of her in the kitchen or living room. Immediately, suspicion flared. It didn't take much to guess where she might be. I grabbed my phone and called her. It rang a few times before she answered, her voice annoyingly casual. "Hey, I'm at my friend's place. Don't worry, everything's fine. I'll be back soon." Her tone, light and dismissive, only fueled my irritation. "What do you mean, you're at a friend's?" I snapped. "Where exactly have you been all morning? Why didn't you tell me?" She sighed, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Calm down. I'll explain when I get home." And with that, she hung up. My fists clenched around the phone. The audacity of her nonchalance made my blood boil. When she finally arrived, I was ready. I'd spent the morning cleaning up the aftermath of the previous night's disaster, taking photos of the wreckage as proof of how far things had spiraled out of control. I showed her the pictures one by one, laying them out like evidence in a courtroom. "This is what I came home to," I said, my voice ice cold. I expected to find some semblance of normalcy, maybe even a quiet evening. Instead, I walked into chaos. "And where were you?" "Drunk and passed out upstairs. I had to kick out those freeloaders myself." She crossed her arms and frowned. "I noticed. And honestly, that was really mean of you. They needed help, and you threw them out like they were trash. It wasn't fair." Her words struck a nerve. "Not fair?" I repeated, incredulous. "What's not fair is you inviting strangers into our home without my consent. What's not fair is you keeping me in the dark about all of this. And what's definitely not fair is you expecting me to clean up the mess they left behind while you go play savior." She rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed with my argument. "Fine. You want to know where I was? I was helping them find a new place to stay. And, for your information, they're going to live with my friend now. So there. Problem solved." Her smug tone only irritated me further. "Problem solved?" I asked, incredulous. "You just dumped your problem onto someone else. You've essentially handed your friend a ticking time bomb. Do you even know what kind of trouble you've gotten us into?" She hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Look, you don't understand. I've been talking to them for weeks. They're good people. They just hit a rough patch. I met them on a forum about personal freedom and success. They're working on this amazing course that's going to help so many people. I took their course, and it changed my perspective on life. They said I was great, and we became friends. But they had some issues with their studio, and they needed somewhere to stay while they worked on a new program. That's all this is." I stared at her, dumbfounded. "So let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You took some online course, befriended the instructors, and decided it was a good idea to let them live with us. Without asking me?" She didn't flinch. "Yes. And honestly, I think you're being dramatic about this whole thing. They even offered us a chance to invest in their next course. The returns could be huge." My patience snapped. "Invest? Absolutely not. We're not giving them a single cent. They've done nothing but disrupt our lives since they got here. And another thing," I said, pointing a finger at her, "you're done talking to them. I don't care what they promised or how much you believe in their bullshit. You're cutting ties with them. End of discussion." She glared at me, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You can't just tell me who I can and can't talk to," she said, her voice shaking with defiance. "Watch me," I replied, turning my back on her. The rest of the day passed in icy silence, with her sulking in one corner of the house and me cleaning up the remains of yet another disaster. But no matter how quiet the house became, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 weeks had gone by since the whirlwind of chaos had seemingly subsided. Life had returned to a semblance of normalcy, and I began to feel like the storm might truly be over. The house was quiet, the nights were undisturbed, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could come home and not brace myself for whatever might await me. I found solace in routine, hoping that my wife had finally taken to heart everything we'd argued about. But, as they say, peace is often the prelude to a new storm. One evening, I returned home after a long day at work, ready to enjoy a calm evening. As I walked through the door, I could hear my wife talking on the phone. It wasn't unusual, but something about the tone of her voice caught my attention. She sounded animated, excited even. I called out a quick greeting, which she acknowledged distractedly, then made my way to the bathroom to wash up. As I stood there, scrubbing the grime of the day from my hands, I realized she was still on the phone. The conversation was dragging on longer than usual. A nagging thought crept into my mind. Could it be them again? The couple who had wreaked havoc on our lives not so long ago? I shook my head, trying to dismiss the idea. Surely she wouldn't make the same mistake twice. Surely she had learned her lesson. But as the minutes ticked by and the conversation showed no signs of ending, my unease grew. I finished washing up and headed back to the living room, determined to get some answers. Just as I entered the room, she hung up the phone. Her eye sparkled with an intensity one hadn't seen in weeks. Before I could say a word, she turned to me with a wide grin and said, "You won't believe this. I've had so much time to think over the past few weeks, and I've realized something. The reason I've been feeling so stuck lately, like I'm in a rut, is because I haven't been working." I raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "Of course," I said. "That's what I've been saying. Things would be a lot easier if you had a job. It's good for structure, purpose, and, well, the finances." She nodded eagerly, as if she had come to this revelation all on her own. "Exactly. And guess what? My friend just offered me a job. She's coming over tomorrow to explain everything." This caught me off guard. "A job?" I asked, cautiously optimistic. "What kind of job?" She shrugged, clearly unbothered by the lack of specifics. She didn't go into a lot of detail, but it's remote, and the hours are super flexible. Sometimes I'd have to go to the office, but only to submit reports or meet deadlines. It's perfect, don't you think? I wanted to feel relieved, but the vagueness of it all set off alarm bells in my head. Still, I decided not to jump to conclusions. "I guess that depends on what it actually entails," I said. "When she comes over tomorrow, we'll hear her out and see what she has to say." My wife's enthusiasm didn't waver. "It's going to be great," she insisted. "I'm finally going to have something meaningful to do. And you'll see, this is going to be a game changer for both of us." I gave her a tight-lipped smile, still feeling skeptical but unwilling to burst her bubble just yet. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "Okay, let's see what your friend has to say tomorrow. Go ahead and invite her over. We'll take it from there." Despite my reservations, I knew there was no point in arguing about something that hadn't even been fully explained yet. For now, I'd play along, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than she was letting on. That day was one of my rare days off, and I decided to make the most of it. My wife and I spent the morning tidying up the house and preparing for her friend's visit. She was clearly excited, going out of her way to make everything perfect. I, on the other hand, approached the situation with cautious optimism. While I was glad she was finally considering work, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubts in the back of my mind. By early afternoon, the house was spotless, the table was set, and we were ready for her friend's arrival. The doorbell rang right on time. I opened the door, and there she was, the same woman who had housed that troublesome couple weeks ago. My stomach tightened instinctively, but I kept my face neutral. She greeted us warmly and stepped inside, looking far more composed than during our last encounter. My wife, practically beaming, ushered her into the living room, and we all sat down to chat. The initial conversation was polite and light, mostly small talk. I waited patiently, eager to get to the real reason for her visit. At one point, I couldn't help but bring up the elephant in the room. "So, about that couple who was staying with you," I began, careful to keep my tone casual. "How's that situation going?" She didn't hesitate. "Oh, I kicked them out weeks ago," she said firmly. "They were not what I expected. Don't worry, they're not my problem anymore." Her answer was straightforward and logical enough to put me at ease. If nothing else, it seemed like she had learned her lesson about letting them overstay their welcome. With that out of the way, she shifted the conversation to the real purpose of her visit, explaining the job she had offered my wife. She laid out the responsibilities in detail, describing how my wife would be working remotely to process applications in their system. Occasionally, she would need to visit the office to submit reports and handle payroll tasks, but most of the work could be done from the comfort of home. The pay structure sounded fair, with a base salary plus a percentage of sales. As far as I could tell, it seemed legitimate. I glanced at my wife, who was hanging on every word. She looked thrilled, and I could see the enthusiasm in her eyes. "That sounds great," I said cautiously. "And everything's above board?" Her friend smiled reassuringly. "Of course. We've been running this for years. It's a great opportunity, and I think she'll be fantastic at it." My wife nodded eagerly, clearly ready to dive in. I decided not to press further. "All right then. Sounds like you've got yourself a deal," I said. From that day forward, my wife's work began. She threw herself into it with surprising enthusiasm, setting up her workspace and diving into the tasks assigned to her. For the first time in a while, she seemed genuinely energized and purposeful. I watched from the sidelines, silently relieved to see her so engaged. The house felt different, too, calmer, more focused. It was a welcome change. About a week into her new job, she approached me with another bit of news. "They're having a little office party next week," she said, her tone light and cheerful. "It's just a small gathering to celebrate some milestones. I'll need to go into the office for it." I nodded, seeing no harm in it. "All right. Sounds reasonable. I might be late getting home that day, though, so don't wait up for me." She smiled, clearly unfazed by my potential absence. "That's fine," she said. "Actually, they're planning something special for me at the party. A little surprise. So don't worry if I'm out late, okay? Everything's going to be great." Her excitement was infectious, but a small part of me couldn't help but wonder what kind of surprise they had in store. Still, I nodded and said, "All right. Have fun, and let me know how it goes." She kissed me on the cheek and walked away, humming to herself, leaving me to hope that this new chapter in her life would finally bring some stability to ours. The day began like any other. I was at work, focused on the usual tasks, when I received a notification on my phone that made my stomach drop. Nearly all the money in my bank account had been withdrawn. I stared at the screen in disbelief, refreshing the app repeatedly in the hope that it was some sort of glitch. But the numbers didn't change. Panic quickly set in. What the hell was going on? I excused myself from a meeting, called my bank, and they confirmed that the transactions had gone through. It wasn't a mistake. I immediately informed my boss that I needed to leave. Fortunately, he's an understanding guy and didn't ask too many questions. I jumped in my car and drove home as fast as I legally could, my mind racing with possibilities. Was it fraud? Had my account been hacked? Or was it something worse? By the time I pulled into the driveway, I was on edge, prepared for the worst but still hoping for some rational explanation. As soon as I opened the door, my worst fears were realized. There, in our bedroom, was my wife. And she wasn't alone. That man from the infamous couple was with her, both of them caught in the act. My world seemed to tilt as rage surged through me. I pulled out my phone and started recording, not trusting myself to speak without evidence of what I was seeing. My wife screamed at me to stop, but I didn't. I needed proof. Proof for what, I didn't yet know, but I knew I needed it. I put the phone down and reached into the drawer of the bedside table, where I kept my firearm for emergencies. The situation was escalating quickly, but my actions felt oddly deliberate, almost automatic. I pointed the gun at the man, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "What the hell are you doing in my house?" I demanded. He stammered, his hands up in a show of surrender, while my wife tried to intervene. "Put it down," she begged. "You don't understand. But before anyone could calm the situation, the man made a sudden move toward me. My reflexes took over, and I fired. The bullet hit him in the stomach, and he collapsed onto the floor, groaning in pain. The sound of the shot rang through the house, leaving a deafening silence in its wake. My wife screamed, her hands covering her mouth, as I reached for my phone to call the police. Within minutes, officers and paramedics arrived, and the man was rushed to the hospital under police supervision. They took my statement, confiscated my firearm, and assured me the situation would be thoroughly investigated. When the chaos settled and we were alone, I turned to my wife, my anger boiling over. "What the hell were you thinking?" I shouted. She tried to compose herself, but her voice trembled as she spoke. "Before you judge me, just listen," she said. "I want to be honest with you. I've been unfaithful. Not just with him, but with others. 6 others, to be exact. And I realize that I can't stop. It's something I enjoy, something I need. That's why I'm proposing we open our marriage." I stared at her, stunned. My mind couldn't process the words coming out of her mouth. Open our marriage? After everything she had done? "Get out," I said coldly. She blinked, clearly surprised by my lack of reaction. "Take your things and get out of my house. Now." To my shock, she didn't argue. She calmly packed a bag, walked out the door, and left without so much as a backward glance. Once she was gone, I locked every door and window in the house, ensuring no one could disturb the fragile solitude I had reclaimed. My thoughts were a chaotic mess, but I knew one thing: I needed a break from all of this. I called my boss and explained the situation, requesting some time off. He agreed without hesitation, offering his support and understanding. Next, I called the bank to block my account and prevent any further unauthorized transactions. The representative assured me they'd investigate the withdrawals, but it would take time. As I hung up the phone, the weight of the day finally crashed down on me. Exhausted and emotionally drained, I fell onto the couch and closed my eyes. For now, there was nothing more I could do. Tomorrow, I would pick up the pieces and figure out how to move forward. But tonight, all I could do was try to get some rest. The next morning, I woke up feeling slightly more composed, though the events of the previous day still weighed heavily on me. My house was quiet, eerily so, but for once, I welcomed the silence. As I moved around, trying to put my thoughts in order, my eyes landed on her laptop. She had left it on the dining table, a glaring reminder of her presence despite her absence. Curiosity, or perhaps desperation, got the better of me. I sat down, opened the lid, and watched the screen come to life. I had no idea what I was about to uncover. The desktop was cluttered with folders and icons, but one stood out immediately: the program she had been using for her so-called job. I clicked on it, and within seconds, the truth began to unravel. It was the course she had mentioned, the one created by that insufferable couple. The realization hit me like a freight train. My hands shook as I navigated through the files, each click revealing more evidence of deceit. This wasn't just a harmless job, it was a well-organized scam, and my wife had been deeply involved. As I delved deeper, I found a folder filled with chat logs and emails. Reading through them, I pieced together the full extent of the betrayal. The couple hadn't been kicked out by her friend as I had been led to believe. On the contrary, her friend had been a willing participant in their schemes. Together, they had formed a group to orchestrate this scam, recruiting others and building a network of deception. My wife's role? Processing applications and, worse, accessing people's financial information. The very thought made my stomach churn. One email thread caught my attention. It was a conversation between my wife, the couple, and her friend. They discussed their plans openly, even brazenly. The tone was celebratory, as if they were proud of their deceit. They joked about how easily people fell for their pitches and how lucrative the operation had become. And then I saw it, a message about me. They had planned for her to leave me eventually, but not before she drained as much money as she could from me. My jaw tightened as I read their cold, calculated words. The audacity was staggering. The pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. The unexplained withdrawals from my account, the secrecy, and her sudden interest in this so-called job, it all made sense now. Further digging revealed client information, including bank details that had been used for fraudulent charges. My wife had memorized my account details, using our trusted devices to authorize transactions without raising suspicion. It was a scheme so audacious that I almost couldn't believe it was real. What angered me most was the sheer arrogance of it all. They had left a digital trail, as if they were untouchable. Chat logs, spreadsheets, even screenshots of their victim's account information were neatly stored on her laptop. It was as if they hadn't considered the possibility of being caught. Her carelessness became their undoing. She had been so preoccupied with her newfound life of deceit and infidelity that she hadn't even bothered to clean up after herself. Every file, every message, was there, waiting to be discovered. As I closed the laptop, my anger turned to resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. They had hurt countless others, and it was time for them to face the consequences. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Thankfully, he picked up on the first ring. I explained everything as succinctly as I could, detailing the scam, the financial theft, and the evidence I had found. He listened intently, his tone growing more serious with every word. "We need to meet," he said firmly. "Bring everything you have." I agreed and set a time for later that day. As I hung up the phone, I glanced back at the laptop, its screen dark now, but still a glaring reminder of everything that had been lost. My marriage, my trust, my financial security, all of it had been shattered by the very person who should have protected it. But as devastating as it was, I knew one thing: this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight to take back what was mine and to ensure they never did this to anyone else again. Once all the evidence had been gathered, the pieces fell into place with startling clarity. My attorney and I worked tirelessly to build a solid case against the scam operation. The evidence from the laptop, combined with financial records and witness statements, painted a damning picture of their activities. We presented everything to the authorities, and it didn't take long for them to act. The wheels of justice turned quickly, fueled by the overwhelming amount of proof we had. One of the key players, the man from the couple, was still in the hospital recovering from his injury. The police wasted no time interrogating him once we filed charges. Cornered and unable to deny the mountain of evidence against him, he cracked under pressure. During his confession, he laid out their entire operation, implicating my wife, her friend, and the rest of the group. His statements aligned perfectly with the information we had uncovered, solidifying the case even further. Their plan had been simple yet bold: wait for the man to recover, then disappear before anyone could catch them. They had underestimated me, assuming I'd stay silent or move on. Instead, my determination to hold them accountable caught them off guard. Their overconfidence proved to be their undoing, and within days, warrants were issued for everyone involved. Police apprehended the remaining members of the group, including my wife's so-called friend, who had been instrumental in coordinating their scams. The fallout was swift and severe. My wife, now under arrest, was granted one phone call. Of all people, she chose to call me. When I picked up, I was met with an angry tirade. She screamed about how terrible I was for betraying her, for not letting her go, and ruining her life. The irony was almost too much to bear. Here was the woman who had cheated on me, stolen my money, and participated in a scam that hurt countless others, now playing the victim. I didn't let her finish. I hung up, her curses still ringing in my ears. It was a small, petty victory, but one I didn't regret. With her in custody, I turned my focus to the next step: divorce. My attorney guided me through the process, and with the evidence we had, it was a relatively straightforward case. The court had no trouble granting me the upper hand. The recordings, the financial proof, and the blatant betrayal all worked in my favor. Because my wife had never held a steady job and most of our assets had been acquired before the marriage, I retained ownership of the house, the car, and the majority of our finances. The divorce was finalized quickly, leaving me free to rebuild my life. My ex-wife's situation, however, was far less fortunate. As the trial for the scam unfolded, it became clear that while she and her friend were deeply involved, their lawyers managed to secure lighter sentences for them. They argued that my wife and her friend were not fully aware of the scale of the scam, painting them as gullible participants rather than masterminds. The judge granted them conditional sentences and ankle monitors, ensuring they couldn't leave their homes without permission. It was frustrating to see them evade harsher punishment, but at least they were marked by their actions. The couple, however, wasn't so lucky. Their role as the orchestrators of the operation left no room for leniency. The evidence, combined with their hospital confession, sealed their fate. They were sentenced to significant prison time, ensuring they wouldn't have the chance to exploit anyone else for years to come. Watching them face justice was a moment of vindication, a small measure of closure after months of chaos. As the courtroom drama ended, I allowed myself a moment to breathe. It felt like the end of a long, grueling chapter. Yet, even as I walked away from the courthouse, a nagging feeling lingered. Something about the way my ex-wife had calmly accepted her ankle monitor, about the way her friend avoided eye contact during sentencing, unsettled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't truly over. They had escaped full accountability, and I suspected they wouldn't stay idle for long. The couple's imprisonment brought some relief, but it also left me wary. I knew how cunning they had been to build their operation in the first place, and I couldn't help but wonder what else they might have set in motion. As much as I wanted to move on, the shadow of their actions still loomed over me. And so, while one chapter had closed, another seemed poised to begin. Some time had passed, and my life had finally begun to settle into a new rhythm. I had moved on, found a wonderful new girlfriend, and taken the necessary steps to rebuild my sense of security. One of the first things I did was change the locks on my house, ensuring that any remnants of my old life couldn't slip back in uninvited. Things were good, stable even, and I dared to think that chapter of chaos was firmly behind me. Then, one evening, there was an unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find my ex-wife standing there, no longer wearing the ankle monitor that had kept her tethered for months. She wasted no time launching into demands, claiming that since the house was once ours, she had every right to move back in. I didn't let her get far. "Get lost," I said firmly. "I've proven in court that this house is mine. Besides, I've moved on. I've got someone new, so why don't you find your way back to your lover in prison?" My words hit their mark. Her face twisted in fury as I calmly shut the door in her face. For several minutes, she pounded on the door, shouting obscenities and threats. My girlfriend, understandably shaken, stood by my side, uncertain of what might happen next. I reassured her, staying close until the commotion subsided. Eventually, my ex-wife's persistence wore out, and she stormed off into the night. The sound of her retreating footsteps was a relief, though the tension lingered in the air. From that day forward, my ex-wife didn't return. It was as if she finally understood that she no longer had any power over me or my life. My girlfriend and I continued to build our future together, leaving the shadows of the past firmly behind us. The peace that followed was something I cherished deeply, a reminder that no matter how turbulent life becomes, it is possible to move forward and find happiness again.
Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. Now let's begin this one. Ezra Blackwood's head felt like it was splitting in two. The harsh fluorescent light stabbed at his eyes as he struggled to focus on his surroundings. White walls, the antiseptic smell, a rhythmic beeping. Hospital. But why? He tried to piece together his fragmented memories. There had been a business trip, a last-minute flight to Chicago. The Hyatt Regency. He'd gotten back early, wanting to surprise Vivian. The sharp click of heels on linoleum snapped him back to the present. Vivian, his wife of 10 years, stood in the doorway, perfectly put together as always in her Chanel suit. Her manicured nails fidgeted with the strap of her Hermes bag. "I'm sorry you caught me with my lover in that hotel room," she said, her voice lacking any real remorse. "He didn't mean to knock you out cold, I swear. Please don't press charges." Ezra stared at her, rage building inside him like magma in a volcano. 10 years of marriage, a decade of shared dreams, struggles, triumphs. All of it a lie. "I'll destroy you both without the law," he replied, his voice hoarse but filled with icy determination. Vivian's concerned facade crumbled, replaced by a smirk that made Ezra's blood boil. She chuckled, the sound grating on his nerves. "Oh, honey, you'll be paying me alimony for the rest of your miserable life." As she turned to leave, something caught Ezra's eye. An emerald pendant hung around her neck, glinting in the harsh hospital lighting. He didn't recognize it. It certainly wasn't a family heirloom he would have known. A gift from her lover, no doubt. Another betrayal to add to the growing list. Before he could demand answers, a nurse bustled into the room. "Mr. Blackwood, you have another visitor. Your sister, Lydia?" Ezra's brow furrowed. He hadn't spoken to Lydia in years. What the hell was she doing here? The nurse ushered in a woman who bore little resemblance to the carefree girl Ezra remembered. Lydia Blackwood, now 35, carried herself with the wary confidence of someone who had seen too much of the world's darkness. Her sharp eyes took in every detail of the room before settling on her brother. "Hello, Ezra," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "It's been a while." Ezra nodded, unsure how to respond. The last time they'd spoken had been at their father's funeral 10 years ago. James Blackwood's death in a car accident had shattered their family. Ezra had thrown himself into his legal career, determined to make his father proud. Lydia had chosen a different path. "I heard about what happened," Lydia continued, perching on the edge of a plastic chair. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," Ezra growled. "What are you doing here, Lydia? Last I heard, you were chasing conspiracy theories halfway around the world." Lydia's eyes flashed with irritation. "I'm an investigative journalist, Ezra, and those conspiracy theories have uncovered some very real, very dangerous truths." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I've been investigating a series of corporate cover-ups. I think they're connected to Dad's death." Ezra scoffed. "Dad died in a car accident, Lydia. It was tragic, but it wasn't some grand conspiracy." "Was it?" Lydia challenged. "Have you ever looked into the circumstances? The brake failure, the convenient lack of witnesses." Ezra opened his mouth to argue, but Lydia pressed on. "I've uncovered links to a company called Nexichem. They're at the center of this whole mess." Nexichem. The name sent a chill down Ezra's spine. It was one of his firm's biggest clients. He'd personally handled several of their environmental compliance cases. "What do you know about Nexichem?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Lydia's eyes narrowed. "More than I can safely share right now. But I think they're involved in something big, Ezra. Something deadly." Before Ezra could respond, he heard hushed voices outside his room. He recognized Vivian's voice, along with a man's he didn't know. The words Nexichem and silencing drifted through the partially open door. Lydia tensed, clearly having heard the same thing. "We can't talk here," she whispered. "It's not safe." As if on cue, a man appeared in the doorway. Felix Reeves, Ezra's longtime friend and a private investigator, surveyed the room with a practiced eye. "Ready to blow this popsicle stand?" Felix asked, his casual tone belying the concern in his eyes. "I've got a car waiting." Ezra nodded, suddenly eager to be anywhere but here. As Felix helped him out of bed, Lydia gathered his belongings. "We'll go to my place," she said quietly. "We have a lot to discuss." Felix's car wound through the city streets, the tension in the vehicle palpable. Ezra's mind raced, trying to process everything that had happened. His perfect life had shattered in an instant, and now his estranged sister was talking about conspiracies and cover-ups. They pulled up to a nondescript apartment building. Lydia led them up 3 flights of stairs, constantly checking over her shoulder. She unlocked a heavy door and ushered them inside. The apartment was small but neat, filled with stacks of papers and multiple computer screens. A young woman with bright blue hair looked up from one of the computers, her eyes widening at the sight of the newcomers. Ezra, Felix, this is my roommate, Zara Chun, Lydia said. Zara, this is my brother Ezra and his friend Felix. Zara nodded curtly, her gaze lingering on Ezra. The corporate lawyer, she said, her tone making it clear that wasn't a compliment. Ezra bristled. Environmental law. Actually, I specialize in helping companies comply with regulations and clean up contaminated sites. Something in Zara's expression shifted. Really? That's not what I expected. Before Ezra could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Harold Winters, his law firm partner. With a sigh, he answered, Ezra, where the hell are you? Harold's voice was tense. Vivian's already filed for divorce. She's seeking a substantial settlement. Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. What? How is that even possible? It's been less than a day. I don't know, but her lawyers are moving fast. We need to talk strategy. Can you come in? I'll be there as soon as I can, Ezra said, his mind reeling. He hung up and turned to the others. I have to go to the office. Vivian's already filed for divorce. Lydia's eyes narrowed. That was fast. Too fast. Ezra, before you go, there's something you need to see. She pulled out a file and spread its contents on the coffee table. These are the results of my investigation into Nexichem. There's a pattern of environmental violations, suspicious accidents at their facilities, and, well, look at this. Ezra leaned in, his legal mind immediately spotting the irregularities in the documents. This can't be right. These violation reports, they're identical to the ones I filed, but the data's been altered. Zara spoke up, her earlier hostility replaced by professional interest. I've been helping Lydia dig into Nexichem's digital footprint. Their security is tight, but I've managed to find some discrepancies in their financial records. As if on cue, one of Zara's computers pinged. She rushed over, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Holy shit. Ezra, I think this is for you. She turned the screen, revealing an encrypted email addressed to Ezra. With shaking hands, he entered his password. The message opened, revealing partial financial records that hinted at massive bribes paid by Nexichem to various officials and law firms, including Ezra's own. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Ezra felt like the floor was dropping out from under him. Everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his career, even his father's death was suddenly in question. Felix was the first to break the silence. Well, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a good old-fashioned conspiracy. What's the play? Lydia looked at Ezra, her expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. That depends on you, big brother. Are you in? Ezra glanced around the room, at his estranged sister who had never given up searching for the truth, at the brilliant hacker who had put aside her prejudices to help, at his loyal friend ready to dive into danger. Then he thought of Vivian's betrayal, of the altered documents, of his father's suspicious death. He took a deep breath. I'm in. Let's take these bastards down. Zara grinned, cracking her knuckles as she turned back to her computer. Now we're talking. Let's see what else we can dig up on Nexichem. As the team began to formulate their plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something far bigger and more dangerous than any of them realized. But for the first time in years, he felt alive. The truth was out there, and he was going to find it, no matter the cost. Ezra Blackwood straightened his tie, his face a mask of professional detachment as he strode into the offices of Winters, Blackwood, and Associates. The familiar scent of leather and expensive cologne did nothing to calm the storm raging inside him. Every face he passed, every greeting he returned, it all felt like a lie now. He nodded to his secretary, Sarah, as he passed. Any messages? Mr. Winters wants to see you in his office as soon as possible, Sarah replied, her brow furrowed with concern. Is everything all right, Mr. Blackwood? There are rumors. Ezra forced a smile. Just a bit under the weather. Nothing to worry about. As soon as his office door closed behind him, Ezra's facade crumbled. He sank into his chair, his mind racing. How deep did this conspiracy go? How many of his colleagues were involved? He booted up his computer, heart pounding as he began to dig through the firm's files on Nexichem. What he found made his blood run cold. Report after report of environmental violations, all neatly covered up with falsified data and legal sleight of hand. And there, buried in a subfolder, was a document detailing a toxic waste spill in a low-income neighborhood. The cancer rates in the area had skyrocketed, but Nexichem had managed to dodge all responsibility. Ezra felt sick. He had built his career on protecting the environment, on holding corporations accountable. And all this time, he had been part of the problem. A commotion outside his office pulled him from his thoughts. He recognized that voice, Vivian. I don't care if he's busy. He's my husband, and I need to speak with him now. Ezra steeled himself as the door burst open. Vivian stormed in, her eyes blazing with a fury he had never seen before. You think you can just disappear and ignore my calls? She hissed. My lawyers are going to bury you, Ezra. Unless what? Ezra asked, his voice deceptively calm. Vivian's lips curled into a cruel smile. Unless you agree to my terms. No questions asked, no fights. You give me what I want, or I'll make sure everyone knows about your dirty little secrets. Ezra's mind raced. What secrets? He had always been faithful, always played by the rules. Then he saw it, the watch on Vivian's wrist. It was too large for her, clearly a man's watch, and he recognized it. It belonged to Harold Winters. Before he could process this new betrayal, his phone buzzed. A message from Harold. My office. Now. Ezra stood, straightening his suit. We're not done here, Vivian. Her laughter followed him out the door. Oh, we're just getting started, darling. Harold's office was a shrine to old money and power. The man himself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, his fingers steepled as he watched Ezra enter. Sit down, Ezra, Harold said, his tone deceptively friendly. We need to talk about Nexichem. Ezra's heart skipped a beat. He fought to keep his expression neutral as he took a seat. What about them? Harold's eyes narrowed. I've heard rumors that you've been investigating our biggest client. I'm sure I don't need to remind you about client confidentiality. The threat was clear. Ezra felt a chill run down his spine. Of course not, he replied smoothly. I'm just doing my due diligence, making sure all our I's are dotted and T's are crossed. Harold nodded, but his eyes remained cold. See that you do. Nexichem is very important to this firm. It would be a shame if anything were to jeopardize that relationship. As Ezra left Harold's office, his phone buzzed again. A message from Felix. Got something you need to see. Meet me at the usual spot. An hour later, Ezra sat in a dimly lit bar, watching surveillance footage on Felix's laptop. His stomach churned as he saw Harold Vivian and a man he recognized as Marcus Thorne, Nexichem's CEO, meeting at a secluded marina. When was this taken? Ezra asked, his voice hoarse. Felix's expression was grim. 2 days ago. Ezra, I think your wife's affair, it wasn't just about sex. I think it was orchestrated to keep you in check. Ezra nodded, the pieces falling into place. His own firm, his own wife. They were all part of Nexichem's web of deceit, and he had been the fool at the center of it all. We need to bring them down, Ezra said, his voice filled with cold determination. All of them. Felix nodded, his eyes glinting with the thrill of the hunt. Where do we start? Zara's fingers flew across the keyboard, her face illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. Lydia paced behind her, while Ezra sat perfectly still, his lawyer's mind cataloging every detail. Got it, Zara announced, her voice tight with excitement. I've decrypted the anonymous email. You're not going to believe this. The screen's filled with financial records, showing a complex web of transactions between Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood and Associates, and a dozen shell companies. It's a massive money laundering operation, Lydia breathed, her journalist instincts on fire. They're hiding millions in bribes and payoffs. Ezra's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Need to talk. It's about Nexichem. Meet me in the parking garage. Level B2. Mia. He recognized the name. Mia Rodriguez, a paralegal at the firm. Young, ambitious, and sharp as a tack. What did she know? I have to go, Ezra said, standing abruptly. Keep digging. We need everything you can find. The parking garage was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of oil and exhaust. Ezra's footsteps echoed as he made his way to level B2. A figure emerged from the shadows, Mia, her eyes wide with fear. Mr. Blackwood, she whispered, glancing around nervously. I found something about Nexichem. I think they're dumping toxic waste illegally. Ezra's heart raced. Tell me everything. Mia's words tumbled out in a rush. She had been organizing files when she stumbled across documents detailing Nexichem's illegal activities. For months, she had been quietly gathering evidence, terrified of what might happen if she came forward. I want to do the right thing, Mia said, her voice shaking. But I'm scared. These people, they're powerful. They're dangerous. Ezra placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You're doing the right thing, Mia. We'll protect you. I promise. As they formulated a plan for Mia to act as a whistleblower, with Ezra as her legal representation, Lydia made another breakthrough. She uncovered old news articles suggesting that their father, James Blackwood, had been investigating Nexichem before his death. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture more horrifying than any of them had imagined. But as they prepared to go public with their evidence, a new complication arose. Vivian reached out to Ezra, her voice honey-sweet on the phone. Darling, I've made a terrible mistake. Can we meet? I want to make things right. Ezra's instinct screamed that it was a trap, but he saw an opportunity. Of course, he replied, his voice carefully neutral. Our usual place? As Vivian spun her tale of manipulation and regret, Ezra discreetly recorded every word. He didn't believe her for a second, but her confession might prove useful. Their celebration was short-lived, however. Zara discovered that their communications had been compromised. Nexichem's private security force was watching their every move. The net was closing in, but Ezra and his team were ready for a fight. The abandoned Nexichem research facility loomed before them, a hulking shadow against the night sky. Ezra's heart pounded as he and Felix approached, their footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. Mia had vanished without a trace, just as they were preparing to go public with their evidence. Felix had traced her last known location to this facility, and now they were walking into what felt very much like a trap. I don't like this, Felix muttered, his hand hovering near the gun concealed under his jacket. It's too quiet. Ezra nodded. We don't have a choice. Mia risked everything to help us. We can't abandon her now. They found a rusted side door, the lock easily picked by Felix's skilled hands. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the acrid smell of chemicals. Their flashlights revealed abandoned equipment, shattered glass, and ominous dark stains on the floor. As they delved deeper into the facility, they stumbled upon a room that made Ezra's blood run cold. It was a makeshift laboratory, filled with bubbling vats of noxious liquid and cages that had clearly once held test subjects. The implications were horrifying. My God, Felix whispered, snapping photos with his phone. This is way bigger than we thought. They're not just dumping toxic waste. They're creating it. A noise from the hallway made them both freeze. Footsteps getting closer. They ducked behind a large piece of equipment, hearts racing as a group of men entered the room. At their head was Marcus Thorne, Nexichem CEO, his expensive suit incongruous in the decrepit lab. Find them, Marcus snarled to his security team. They can't be allowed to leave here alive. Ezra and Felix exchanged a look of panic. They were trapped, outgunned, and running out of options. But before they could move, another figure entered the room, Lydia. Ezra's heart stopped. What was his sister doing here? But as he watched, his confusion turned to horror. Lydia walked up to Marcus, Her posture relaxed, familiar. "The basement is clear," she reported. "No sign of them." Marcus nodded. "Good work, Agent Blackwood. Your cover has been invaluable to us." Ezra felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Lydia, working for Nexichem? It couldn't be true. But as he watched his sister interact with the man responsible for so much suffering, doubt crept in. Had everything been a lie? The standoff that followed was tense, with Lydia clearly torn between her loyalty to her brother and her commitment to whatever mission she was on. Ezra's mind raced, trying to make sense of this betrayal, but there was no time for explanations. As Marcus's men closed in, violence erupted. In the chaos, Felix was hit, crying out in pain as a bullet tore through his shoulder. Ezra managed to fight his way to a locked door, behind which they found Mia, terrified but alive. As they fled the facility, alarms blaring and gunshots echoing behind them, Lydia appeared one last time. She pressed a USB drive into Ezra's hand, her eyes pleading. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'll explain everything, I promise. But you have to go. Now." Ezra hesitated, 1,000 questions on his lips. But with Felix bleeding and Mia shaking with fear, he knew they had no choice. They ran into the night, leaving Lydia behind to maintain her cover, whatever that truly meant. As they sped away in Felix's car, Ezra clutched the USB drive, his mind reeling. The evidence they had gathered, the risks they had taken, the betrayals they had suffered. It all paled in comparison to the realization that this conspiracy went deeper than any of them had imagined. And at the center of it all was his sister, a woman he thought he knew, now a stranger playing a game he didn't understand. As the city lights blurred past, Ezra made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Nexichem, Winters, Blackwood, and Associates, even Lydia herself, they would all face justice. The web of deceit was vast, but Ezra was done being a fly caught in its strands. It was time to become the spider. The safe house was a far cry from the luxury Ezra Blackwood was accustomed to. Peeling wallpaper, the musty smell of old books, and a pervasive dampness that seemed to seep into his bones. But right now, it was the safest place in the world. Ezra sat at a rickety table, his laptop open before him, surrounded by stacks of documents. Across from him, Mia Rodriguez pored over financial records, her brow furrowed in concentration. In the corner, Zara's fingers flew across her keyboard, the glow of multiple screens illuminating her face in the dim room. They had been here for days, maybe weeks. Time had become a blur. Felix's activist contacts had come through, providing them with a network of safe houses to move between. But the constant fear of discovery, the paranoia that each shadow held an enemy, was taking its toll. Ezra rubbed his eyes, trying to focus on the document before him. His mind kept drifting to Lydia, his sister, the undercover agent. The betrayal still stung, even as he tried to rationalize it. Was she really on their side, or had everything been a lie? "Holy shit," Zara's voice cut through the silence. "You guys need to see this." Ezra and Mia crowded around Zara's workstation. On the screen, plans for a massive construction project unfolded. "They're planning to dump toxic waste in the Oakwood Nature Reserve," Zara explained, her voice tight with anger. "If this goes through, it'll contaminate the groundwater for the entire region." Ezra felt his stomach churn. Oakwood was one of the last unspoiled areas in the state, home to endangered species and a vital water source for surrounding communities. "We can't let this happen," Mia said, her voice shaking with determination. "We have to stop them." Ezra nodded, his mind already racing with legal strategies. "We need more evidence. Concrete proof that links Nexichem to the dump site." As if on cue, Ezra's burner phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Ezra," Vivian's voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need to talk. I want to help." Ezra's grip on the phone tightened. "Why should I believe you?" "Because I know things, Ezra. Things that could bring down Nexichem, Harold. All of them. Meet me, please. For old time's sake. Ezra's mind raced. It could be a trap, but if Vivian was telling the truth, her testimony could be the key to breaking the case wide open. I'll think about it, he said finally and hung up. Zara and Mia looked at him expectantly. Ezra sighed. That was Vivian. She says she wants to help. Mia's eyes widened. You can't seriously be considering trusting her. We don't have to trust her, Ezra replied, a plan forming in his mind. But we can use her. If she's genuine, great. If not, well, we'll be ready. As they began to formulate a plan, Ezra couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Nexachem's toxic dump could happen any day now. They needed to act fast. But first, he had a decision to make about Lydia. His sister was in deep, playing a dangerous game. Could he trust the information she was feeding them? Or was she leading them into a trap? Ezra stared at the USB drive Lydia had pressed into his hand during their escape from the Nexachem facility. He hadn't told the others about it yet. With a deep breath, he plugged it in. What he found made his blood run cold. Detailed plans of Nexachem's operations, financial records, emails implicating high-level government officials. And at the center of it all, a name that made Ezra's heart stop, James Blackwood. Their father hadn't just been investigating Nexachem before his death. He had uncovered a conspiracy that went far beyond corporate greed. This was about power, about control over the most basic human need, water. Ezra leaned back, his mind reeling. They weren't just fighting a corporation anymore. They were up against a system, a web of corruption that stretched from the boardroom to the highest levels of government. He looked at Mia and Zara, both still poring over documents, unaware of the bombshell Ezra had just uncovered. They had all risked everything to get this far. Now, it was time to take the biggest risk of all. Pack up, Ezra said, his voice filled with determination. We're going to meet Vivian, and then we're going to bring the whole damn system down. The Nexachem boardroom was a study in corporate opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the polished mahogany table reflected the concerned faces of the board members gathered around it. Marcus Thorne, CEO of Nexachem, stood at the head of the table, his usual confidence noticeably shaken. Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you that these allegations are completely unfounded. Nexachem has always operated within the bounds of the law. From her seat at the table, Lydia Blackwood fought to keep her expression neutral. Years of undercover work had honed her poker face, but even she was finding it difficult to maintain her composure. Everything was coming to a head, and she prayed that Ezra's plan would work. As if on cue, the doors burst open. Ezra strode in, Mia at his side, followed by a team of federal agents. The room erupted in chaos. Marcus Thorne, Ezra's voice cut through the commotion. You and your co-conspirators are under arrest for environmental crimes, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. Marcus's face contorted with rage. This is absurd. You have no authority. Oh, but we do, Mia interrupted, her voice steady despite her nervousness. She nodded to Zara, who had slipped in unnoticed during the confusion. Suddenly, every screen in the room came to life. Financial records, emails, surveillance footage. All the evidence they had painstakingly gathered over the past weeks played out for all to see. At this very moment, Ezra continued, this evidence is being broadcast to every Nexachem employee, shareholder, and regulatory agency. The game is over, Marcus. Lydia stood, finally dropping her cover. And that's not all. We have proof that Nexachem was responsible for the death of James Blackwood, a man who threatened to expose your plan to monopolize water resources through deliberate contamination. The color drained from Marcus's face. He lunged for his laptop, likely containing even more incriminating evidence. But Ezra was faster. What followed was a desperate chase through the Nexachem headquarters. Ezra pursued Marcus through winding corridors and up staircases, their footsteps echoing in the suddenly empty building. They burst onto the roof. The city spread out before them. Marcus stood at the edge, the hard drive clutched in his hand. the wind whipping his usually immaculate suit. "It's over, Marcus," Ezra called out, cautiously approaching. "There's nowhere left to run." Marcus turned, a wild look in his eyes. "You don't understand, Blackwood. This goes beyond Nexichem, beyond me. We were creating a better world. By poisoning people? By killing my father." Ezra's voice cracked with emotion. "How is that a better world?" "Resources are running out," Marcus snarled. "Water is the new oil. Whoever controls it controls everything. Your father was too idealistic to see that. Just like you." Ezra took another step forward. "It doesn't have to be this way, Marcus. Turn yourself in. Tell the truth. Maybe then we can actually build a better world." For a moment, it seemed like Marcus might consider it. Then, with a bitter laugh, he hurled the hard drive off the roof. Ezra lunged for it, but it was too late. The small device disappeared into the city below, taking with it the names of countless corrupt officials. As the authorities led Marcus away, Ezra stood at the edge of the roof, looking out over the city. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. The congressional hearing room was packed. Journalists, activists, and curious citizens filled every available seat, while cameras broadcast the proceedings to millions around the world. Ezra adjusted his tie, acutely aware of the weight of the moment. Beside him, Lydia gave his hand a reassuring squeeze. Despite the years of separation and recent revelations, they were in this together now. "Mr. Blackwood," the committee chairman began, "please tell us in your own words what you uncovered about Nexichem and its collaborators." For the next several hours, Ezra and Lydia laid out the entire conspiracy, the environmental violations, the cover-ups, the bribes, and finally, the truth about their father's death. As they spoke, screens around the room displayed evidence, much of it provided by Harold Winters in exchange for a plea deal. In another part of the city, Vivian Blackwood was led away from her private jet in handcuffs, her attempt to flee the country thwarted by an anonymous tip. Back in the hearing room, Ezra concluded his testimony. Nexichem's crimes are not isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper sickness in our society, where profit is prioritized over people, and the environment is seen as a resource to be exploited rather than protected. It's time for a change. The aftermath of the hearing was a whirlwind. Indictments were handed down, regulations were tightened, and a national conversation about corporate responsibility and environmental protection took center stage. Months passed. Ezra found himself standing before a group of eager law students, their faces a mix of idealism and uncertainty that reminded him of himself. Not so long ago. "The law is a powerful tool," he told them, "but it's only as good as the people wielding it. You have the power to shape the future, to fight for justice, to protect those who can't protect themselves. Use it wisely." As the students filed out, Ezra's phone buzzed with a message from Lydia. Her book, Exposing Corporate Environmental Crimes, was hitting shelves next week, another step in their ongoing fight. Later that evening, Ezra met with Felix and Zara at their new office. The sign on the door read Clearwater Tech, Innovative Solutions for a Cleaner Future. Felix, his arm still in a sling but his spirit unbroken, grinned as Ezra entered. "Welcome to the revolution, counselor." Zara looked up from her computer, her eyes bright with excitement. "We just finalized the plans for our first water purification plant. Want to see." As Ezra looked over the plans, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't experienced in years. They had a long way to go, but they were on the right path. His phone buzzed again. A message from Mia, now in her second year of law school, top of her class. She was interning at an environmental law firm over the summer and wanted Ezra's advice on a case. Ezra smiled as he typed his reply. The fight for justice was far from over, but they weren't in it alone anymore. A new generation was rising, armed with knowledge, passion, and the determination to make a difference. As he left the office that night, Ezra paused to look up at the stars, barely visible through the city's light pollution. Somewhere up there, he liked to think his father was watching, proud of what they had accomplished and what they continued to fight for. The web of deceit had been torn down, but the work of rebuilding, of creating a more just and sustainable world, was just beginning. And Ezra Blackwood was ready for the challenge. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Looking back, I often wonder how my life took such unexpected turns. My early years were simple, growing up in a modest home where loyalty, love, and trust were core values. My parents, though not perfect, exemplified a devoted couple, and I always assumed I'd follow in their footsteps. I admired their unwavering commitment and never imagined my life would take such a different direction. As I grew older, I held on to those lessons, believing that if I did everything right, I'd find the same stability and happiness. I worked hard, pursued my passions, and met someone who seemed to share my ideals. But life proved more complicated. The values I cherished were tested in ways I never expected, and the perfect life I envisioned began to crumble. On a crisp November morning, I found myself in the driveway, washing my 2008 Mustang, a symbol of the freedom and control I craved in my chaotic life. While others found peace in hobbies like golf, I preferred the calming ritual of caring for my car. As I cleaned, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away, hinting at the profound changes about to unfold. Hoping the warm autumn days would last a bit longer, I was just finishing the car's interior when an unexpected visitor shattered my peace. A car, driven erratically, screeched to a stop in front of my house. I recognized the driver, or thought I did. It was Judy, my mother-in-law. She stumbled out, tears streaming down her face, and I knew something was terribly wrong. She left the car at an awkward angle in the street and ran down the driveway, tears in her eyes. She rushed toward me, buried her head in my chest, and started crying uncontrollably. "Come on, Judy," I said gently. "Let's go inside and you can tell us what's going on." I led her into the kitchen and sat her down. "He's such an idiot," she cried. "Would you like something to drink, Judy?" I asked. "Do you have tea?" she asked through her tears. I nodded, brought her a cup, and made some tea. "Give me your car keys so I can move it off the street," I said. She handed me the keys, and I moved her car into the driveway. Then I called my wife, Penny, to come down. When I returned, I brought Judy the tea, along with sugar, milk, and a slice of chocolate cake she had brought over the day before. "Thanks, Donnie," Judy sobbed. "Penny, you're lucky to have him. You'll probably never have to worry about your husband cheating on you." I was stunned. I couldn't believe Ed, Penny's dad, would cheat on Judy. As I started to leave, Judy grabbed my hand. "Donnie, you're family too. I want to talk to you," she said. "Okay, Judy, what's going on?" I asked. "Why do men cheat?" she asked. I felt uncomfortable. "Mom, some say men are wired to spread their genes. Maybe Dad has a strong urge, but that doesn't make it right," Penny said. "I'm not talking about all men," Judy replied. "I'm talking about your father, who promised to be faithful and keeps breaking that promise." "Mom, you know Dad loves you," Penny interrupted. "But sometimes he struggles with his nature. All you can do is try to work through it." "When he married me, he vowed to put our marriage above everything else," Judy said. The doorbell rang, ending the conversation for now. "I'll get it," I said, glad for the distraction. I opened the door to find Ed, who looked defeated. "Hi, Don," he said softly. "Is Judy here?" "They're in the living room," I replied. He walked inside, and I went back to washing my car, trying to clear my mind. As I was focusing on the task, I heard a giggle behind me. 2 arms wrapped around my waist, and a lock of brown hair fell over my shoulder. "Donnie, do you love me?" Penny asked. "Of course I do, Penny," I said. "I'm dealing with a family crisis, and I need your help. Can you grill some steaks and help calm Mom down?" "They might actually divorce this time," she said. "Has this happened before?" I asked. "Several times," Penny said. "They love each other, but keep going through this. Dad seems serious about getting help now. He knows he can't do it alone." "Maybe your mom should have put her foot down sooner," I suggested. "What do you mean?" Penny asked. "If I were her, I would have left him the first time he cheated," I said. "They need to face the consequences of their choices. He needs to understand that his actions could cost him his wife and family." Penny looked at me, shocked. Then her lips trembled as she tried to hold back tears. I could see she was on the verge of breaking down. I wrapped my arms around her, telling her to calm down. "I'd do anything for you," I said. "Donnie, it's easy for you to say. Your parents were perfect, so you've never had to deal with this. I don't want my parents to split up or be alone. When we have kids, I want them to have grandparents who love them. I want us all to be one big, happy family, without worrying about which parent to invite to events because the other won't come," she said. "Okay, honey," I replied. "I'll help. I'll cook the steaks, and you can send your dad to talk to me while you talk to your mom. Maybe when the food's ready, we can all talk together on the deck." I didn't agree with what I was doing, but I loved Penny and understood her need to keep her family together. We all want our families to stay intact, even when our parents fall short. So I spent the afternoon talking with my father-in-law. We chatted about my Mustang, sports, and grilling steaks. He tried to come across as knowledgeable, but I knew he was full of it, especially when he lied about a car that didn't even exist. Eventually, I asked, "So, what's going on with you and Judy?" He looked like I'd knock him. Then he almost cried, saying, "I didn't mean to hurt her. She wasn't supposed to find out." I thought, how original. If you didn't want to hurt her, why do the one thing that would? I stayed calm, though I was seething inside. I imagined him hurting Penny, and I wanted to kick him off my property. Judy deserved better. She should divorce him. I thought of my dad and Uncle Steve, who were both good men. Any of them would have appreciated a woman like Judy. But instead, here was this idiot trying to save face by saying he needed to reconnect with the church. I had to stifle my laughter at the thought. Later, Judy and Penny joined us on the deck for dinner. Ed tried to play the repentant husband, but it was clear he was just trying to save himself again. After a while, I excused myself, went inside, and laughed so hard I cried. When I returned, Penny gave me a strange look, while Ed acted like he was waiting to be canonized. Judy, however, was in real pain, torn between cutting him out of her life or trying to salvage what was left. She was relying on us to help her make the right choice. "So, Donnie, do you think counseling could help?" Judy asked. I glanced at Ed, who gave me a slight nod, and then at Penny, who also nodded, trying to save her parents' marriage. Finally, I looked into Judy's eyes, which were sincere. I answered, "Counseling can help you work through problems and see things in your relationship that you might otherwise miss." It wasn't a lie. I'd heard it on a therapy show, so there was some truth to it. Judy nodded. "Okay, we'll give it a try." She reached for Ed's hand and smiled. Penny looked at me, and I felt guilty. I was doing this for her, but it didn't sit well with me. I excused myself, saying I needed to show Ed something in the garage. Once there, I grabbed him by the throat and slammed him against the wall. "Prick," I hissed. "This is the last time I lie to save your cheating back. If you cheat again, you'll have more than a divorce to worry about. Got it?" He quickly nodded, and I let him go. We returned to the kitchen, where I smiled and acted like everything was fine, but Ed was visibly shaken. Later that night, we had a good time with Penny, but just over a month later, 3 days after Christmas, we found ourselves in the morgue facing Ed's body. The attendant pulled the sheet back with a flourish, revealing the lifeless form of a man who had once been full of life. Penny collapsed in tears, Judy turned away, and I went into shock, my mind racing with absurd thoughts. The attendant asked if we could identify the body, and both Judy and Penny nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his attempt at a comforting smile only coming off as eerie. We led Penny out of the morgue, where a detective was waiting. "So, the deceased was your husband?" he asked Judy. She nodded, squeezing my hand. "When he didn't come home last night, I got worried," she said. "Ed always called if he was going to be late." The detective offered us coffee, which I declined after seeing the state of the coffee maker. Penny asked, "What happened to him?" "I can't reveal details of the investigation," he began, "but it'll be in the papers soon. Your husband, your father, young lady, was found at the Sly Easy Motel on Sycamore Avenue. A hysterical woman was with him. Her husband caught them together, kicked in the door, and, well, he kept the last bullet for himself. You should go back to the morgue and say goodbye," the detective said gently. "Ma'am, I'll ask the coroner to be gentle with his face," the detective offered. "That won't be necessary," Judy replied coldly. "No problem," the detective said. "We have clear evidence. The security tape shows everything, the guy kicking in the door. Your husband was already gone, and there are no signs of anyone else moving around." "Detective," Judy said firmly, "I meant it's not necessary. I don't care where he's buried." Judy stood up, and I followed. Penny looked at her mother and said to the detective, "She's upset." He just nodded. As soon as we left the detective's office, Judy broke down, crying on my shoulder as I drove them home. Throughout the day, people came by to offer condolences. Our neighbor Tanya stopped by with some treats. "How are you holding up?" she asked. I shrugged. "It's okay, honey. We're friends," she said. "I know you spent a lot of time with Ed. I used to see him chatting with you while you polished your Mustang." "Tanya," I whispered, "I couldn't stand that guy. He was a serial cheater, and it was just in his nature. Judy deserves better." She laughed. "But Judy loved him. He was her first everything. That's why she kept forgiving him. Without him, she'd be lost." But Tanya was wrong. Over the weeks, Judy's anger towards Ed only grew. She even refused to attend his funeral at first, but I convinced her to go for Penny's sake. Eventually, Penny got angry with both of us, especially when I refused to speak at the funeral. I couldn't think of a single good thing to say about Ed, and even his best friends struggled with the eulogy. Eddie was Ed. You should have known him. After the funeral, Judy became more involved with us, but certain things like watching TV shows where a husband cheated would set her off. Penny and I often discussed how we could help her. Penny seemed to move on from her father's end of life fairly quickly, and life resumed. About 3 months later, we hosted a gathering, inviting every eligible man we could think of for Judy. At 43, she looked more like Penny's sister than her mother. But Judy didn't know how to flirt or mingle. She'd only ever been with Ed, who had swept her off her feet when she was 18. We knew it would take time for her to adjust, so we planned to keep hosting these gatherings. After the party, as we were cleaning up, I noticed Penny's phone on the counter and saw she had a message. Assuming it was from her mom, I checked it and froze. Penny had been texting another man. As I read through the messages, I realized she was dating someone else. Shocked, I stood there feeling like my world was falling apart. How had I missed this? Penny and I spent so much time together. When did she even find the time? Then it hit me. Penny had always defended her father, even when he was caught cheating. She insisted it was just his nature. Maybe she was more like her father than I realized. After all, you can't fight nature. I guess they expected me to react like Judy. Just accept it, I thought. Judy loved that man despite everything. Maybe that's why she kept forgiving him until the very end. Her anger might not have been because he cheated again, but because his end of life robbed her of the chance to forgive him one more time. "Someone's slacking on the cleaning," Penny smiled. "But it's okay. I've done enough for both of us. Let's move to the bedroom." "Honey, I need to work on the brakes," I said, watching her expression shift to sadness and frustration. "How long will it take?" she asked. "All night if I do them all," I replied. "Can we do it tomorrow? Maybe tomorrow should be my turn," she said, hinting at plans of her own. Her suggestion irritated me. Did she really think I'd want to be with her after she'd been with someone else? "Honey, I'd love it if you didn't do the brakes tonight and came to bed with me," she insisted. "And I'd love it if you let me do the brakes after grilling and entertaining at a party for your mom," I shot back. "If you really loved me, you'd do them later," she challenged. "If you really loved me, you let me do them now," I retorted. "What's wrong with you, Donnie?" she asked. "You usually want me all day, but today you're distant. Do you know how many women here tell me how lucky I am to have you? Even Tanya said what she'd do to you if I weren't around." "Well, tomorrow's another day," I said, leaving her standing there. "Okay," she called after me, but I knew what was going on. She was desperate for Zex tonight because she had no plans for us tomorrow. She'd be too tired after being with someone else. Maybe I'm jumping to conclusions, I thought, recalling a TV show where a jealous husband mistakenly thought his wife was cheating. He wrecked a car he thought belonged to her lover, only to find out it was a gift for him. The wife divorced him. The next morning I went to work as usual. Penny made me breakfast and I said, "I'm sorry. I love you, Penny." "What's gotten into you this morning?" she asked, smiling. "I just wanted you to know how much I care about you," I said, feeling guilty, as if trying to stop her from doing something we'd both regret. At work, I immersed myself in tasks. By 9:30, I was ahead of schedule and left early. As I was leaving, Penny called. "Hi, honey," she said. "Want to have lunch together?" "I'd love to," I replied. "Home or a restaurant?" I felt relieved, thinking I had been wrong. Then she said, "Hold on, I have another call." A few seconds later, she returned. "Can we do lunch tomorrow? Mom needs to talk." "I'll probably be busy," I said and hung up, my suspicions returning. I called Judy. "How's your day going?" I asked. Better now that I've heard from my favorite son-in-law, she said. Your only son-in-law, I reminded her. But still my favorite, she laughed. Have you talked to Penny today? She's going to ask you something soon, Judy said. Just don't set me up with one of your friends again, she joked. I'm not ready to date. No, just a dinner for the three of us, I said. Oh, that sounds nice. I'll pretend to be surprised when she calls, Judy replied. Bye, Judy. Have a good day, I said, ending the call. The call delayed me by 10 minutes, and I realized Penny had only called to confirm I was at work. Maybe she'd picked up a few tricks from her father, who got caught a lot. I drove straight to the motel and quickly spotted Penny's Ford Focus in the parking lot. I knew exactly which room to go to. I saw a cleaning lady nearby and paid her $50 to quietly open the door. As soon as I entered, I saw him trying to turn around. I crossed the room, yanked him off the bed, and slammed him onto the hard floor. Donnie, what are you doing? Penny screamed, trying to pull me away. I calmly stood up and removed her hands from me. Don't ever touch me again, I said coldly. I called my secretary, told her I was sick and wouldn't be in for the rest of the day or the next. Then I dialed emergency to report an attack. Penny sat silently on the bed, trying to speak, but I kept telling her to shut up. Donnie, when we get home, she started. We don't have a home, I interrupted. I'm not living with a cheater. Go to your mother's. The police arrived, and I stepped outside to talk to them. I'm the one who called, I said. You don't look hurt, one of the officers remarked. Not me, him, I pointed at Rick, still unconscious. They cuffed me and put me in the cruiser as the ambulance arrived. I barely spoke, too numb to explain. At the station, I was booked on suspicion of attack. They had no solid evidence yet, just suspicions, and I wasn't in the mood to confess. In the holding cell with 8 others, I sat on a bench, lost in thought. There's a big difference between suspecting your spouse is cheating and actually confronting it. People change, and sometimes that leads to a split. But in other cases, the hatred festers, and the divorce becomes a battle. But for me, it wasn't like that. I loved Penny deeply, and until I walked into that motel room, I planned to spend my life with her. Seeing her with Rick, an older fat bald man, shattered me. I couldn't understand it. If she wanted someone like that, why marry me? She was the one who pursued me from the start. As I sat there, trying to make sense of it all, a stout policeman called my name, Don Osmond. I approached the bars as he opened the door, flanked by 2 other officers. Are you going to shoot me? I asked. No, you idiot, you've been bailed out, the cop replied. By who? I asked. He just gave me a blank look. Does it matter? He asked. What are the charges? Who bailed me out? How long have I been here? I pressed. Buddy, you ask too many questions. Do you want out or not? He snapped. Officer, I said, trying to stay calm. I know you deal with a lot of people, but this is my first time in jail. If you could just answer a couple of questions, it would mean a lot to me. The other officers looked at him and he sighed. Fine. It's 2:00 in the afternoon, and you've been here almost 2 hours. I leaned in and spoke quietly so only they could hear. I caught my wife with our neighbor at a motel. I know I didn't handle it well, but I don't want to see either of them again. If Penny bailed me out, I'd rather stay here. Sorry, kid, he said. It's her. She was crying the whole time, but don't worry. Some fat guy and his lawyer talked to the prosecutor. They're not pressing charges, but I wouldn't trust them. You'll be here a couple of days to cool off. Then you can bail yourself out. I sat back down, noticing the other inmates watching me. They were probably wondering why I wasn't leaving. I knew Penny was trying to bail me out because she felt guilty, but I wanted nothing to do with her. I couldn't help but think about how I'd encouraged Judy to forgive Ed, yet I couldn't do the same for Penny. Just then, the cop returned. Hey, Osmond, there's someone else here to see you. Not the first one. It's her sister, Judy. She's in the interrogation room. Want to see her? Yes, I said. He cuffed me and led me to a partitioned room with bulletproof glass. I sat down and stared at Judy through the glass. Hey, Donnie, she said. What's going on? Penny just said you strike up your neighbor and wouldn't let her bail you out. Judy, she cheated on me, I said. Her face fell. With him, that's disgusting. But why? From what she told me, you're always... Before we could finish, a tall man in a cheap suit knocked on the wall. Excuse me, he said. Are you Don Osmond? I nodded. Can you join me in the conference room across the hall when you're done here? He asked. The officers uncuffed me. He's not a threat. Why the cuffs? The man asked. He's here for attack, the cop explained. Though honestly, I'd have done the same thing. Donnie, don't do anything stupid. Judy warned. I know how you feel. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. If I get out today, I'll send Penny to stay with you. I walked into the conference room where Penny, Rick, and 2 other men were sitting. Penny jumped up, and Rick limped toward me. Get away from me, I shouted. If any of these idiots come near me, I'm going back to my cell. The guy at the table introduced himself. Mr. Osmond, I'm Willis Drummond, the district attorney. Mr. Daniels here represents your neighbor. We have a suggestion that could let everyone walk away now. What are you talking about, Willis? I asked. Drummond turned to Daniels. Why don't you explain, Charlie? He said as Daniels began talking to me like we were old friends. Don, this is an unfortunate situation. The emotional toll alone is terrible. There's no reason for you to leave here with a criminal record that could haunt you. These charges, attack and battery, intent to do grievous damage, are serious, Daniels said. I'm not worried, I replied. With my education and specialty, my career won't be affected. Daniels swallowed. No need for an innocent person to suffer over a situation that spiraled out of control. Innocent? Who here is innocent? I'm the one who got hurt, I said. At that moment, Penny started crying. I thought I had a wife I could love for life. I was wrong. I thought I had a friend next door I could trust. Wrong again. Donnie, what about Tanya? Rick asked. She's done nothing wrong. Why hurt her? Tanya deserves to know the truth. She deserves better than a cheater. She'll be fine without you, I said. Maybe we'll even get through this together. No, Rick pleaded. Don't tell her. Daniels jumped in. Here's the deal. My client won't press charges if you agree to forget this ever happened. I won't forget, I said. I'll take it to a jury. When they hear why I strike your client, they'll understand. I'll name him in my divorce and testify against him in Tanya's. The 4 of them huddled and argued quietly, then turned back to me. What do you want? They asked. Nothing, I replied. I won't tell Tanya or sue you, but you must testify in the divorce and deny the charges and stay 50 feet away from me and my things. Deal, Rick said with a grin. Good. I know I'm about 50 feet from her now, but that starts once I leave the building, right? I added. I don't care what you do. She's not mine anymore, Rick muttered. Can I go now? I asked. No, Penny shouted. We're not doing this. Willis, walk me to the counter so I can get my things. I need my wallet for a cab. As I walked out, all I could hear was Penny crying. When I got home, Tanya was outside and called to me. Where have you been, stranger? She asked. My husband got into a bad situation and got roughed up. Poor guy, I said. It's tough, Tanya. I'm sorry, but I've had a rough day too. We'll talk later. Send your wife over, she said. Tanya, I don't have a wife anymore, I replied, leaving her shocked. Inside, Penny's cell phone rang, but I let it go to voicemail. After the 5th call, it went silent, then rang again, this time from Judy's number. I picked up to tell her to stop calling. Judy, can you... I started. Honey, you have to... I hung up. Half an hour later, the phone rang again. It was Judy. I answered. Donnie, are you there? She asked. Hi, Judy, I said. I had to give Penny some tea with sleeping pills. She's out of control, crying and blaming everyone for ruining her life. I believe it, I said sadly. But there aren't many people to blame. Oh, she blames Rick and says he tricked her into that deal. She also blames you for your behavior. How am I doing? I asked. Donnie, you're not acting like yourself, she said softly. And that's exactly what she expected. Does it ever get better? I asked. No, she whispered. It gets worse. You start doubting yourself, wondering what's wrong with you, why he chose someone else. You compare yourself to others, and every time he's late or not where he's supposed to be, you imagine the worst. It never goes away, and you never fully trust again. Judy, can I tell you something? I asked. Of course we're family, she said. I lied to you, I admitted. When we were trying to get you to take Ed back and go to counseling, I thought you should just overlook his cheating, but you said what Penny wanted. Because you love her, she finished. I know, Donnie. You're a terrible liar. Your mouth says one thing, but your eyes say another. Ed was foolish, I said. No one he cheated with was worth a fraction of you. Maybe it's in their blood, she replied. I can't believe Penny let that gross guy near her, let alone... She cut herself off. Donnie, I'm sorry, but I'm not you. I won't keep taking her back just for her to do it again. Maybe she got it from her father, I said. She always said you can't fight nature. I hope that's not true, she said. You can train wild animals. Maybe people can change too. But it's rare, Judy, and it takes a lot of effort, I replied. Cheaters will cheat. So what does that mean for us? She asked softly. We have 2 choices, I said. We can move on and start fresh, knowing we're just good people who love the wrong ones. You have a beautiful daughter to show for it. I have nothing, so my life feels wasted. Or we can stay and hope they change, but then we're just fools for putting up with it. You deserve someone worthy of you, and I should find someone who is too. Who are you talking to, Mom? Penny asked. Is it Donnie? Does he want to talk to me yet? Did you tell him how sorry I am? Bye, Judy, I said. Looks like you've got your hands full. In the following days, I talked to Judy a lot. Tanya and some neighbors brought food and chatted with me. I hired a lawyer and prepared a fair divorce agreement. I wanted to split everything equally, even though it wasn't fair to me. I didn't want things to get ugly, but I was ready to go to court if necessary. My lawyer got Rick to spill everything. It had been going on for over 6 months, and Rick believed he wasn't the first. I asked Judy if I could come over to talk. When I arrived, she opened the door, and I hugged her. Penny came up to me. Donnie, I've missed you so much, she said. Penny, I'm here to make this easier, I said. I didn't want a stranger handing you divorce papers, so I brought them myself. No, Donnie, she pleaded. I'll stop. It won't happen again. You have to give me another chance. I'm going to see a counselor. Penny, that won't help, I said. This isn't the first time. My lawyer questioned Rick. We know everything. You've been with him for over 6 months, and I doubt he was the first. How could you look me in the eye? It was just sex, she said. You and I are so much more than that. You and I are nothing now, I replied. All that's left is a gold ring, and that means nothing when the vows are broken. Donnie, please, she begged. No, Penny, I said. I'm not living like this. You're being unfair, she whined. You're tearing my heart out. You love me. Damn it, Penny, shut up, Judy said. Mom, stay out of this, Penny snapped. He's being unreasonable. It doesn't have to be this way. I love him so much, I feel like my heart will burst. Boo, 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 Judy shouted. You're just like your father, Penny. You act like the world revolves around you and what you want. I forgave your father repeatedly, and maybe you think that's how it should be. But Donnie isn't me. You're a grown woman, so act like it. You had the perfect marriage, and you ruined it. Now get over it. Donnie's hurting too. He's been so depressed. I can't believe you did this to someone who loves you so much. But then your father did the same to me. I'm glad he's free now. I only wish I had been. But Mom, I'm depressed too, Penny said. I know I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I'm hurting as well. Penny, it's your own fault. As much as I love you, maybe you deserve it, Judy replied. I agree, Penny said. But I don't think it was bad enough to get divorced over. Shouldn't that be up to the person you hurt? Judy asked. Marriage is about what both people want, Penny. Maybe Donnie doesn't want to be married to you anymore. Stop saying that, Mom, Penny yelled. She turned to me. Donnie, haven't I been a good wife? I've cleaned, cooked, and given you everything you could want. Why can't you focus on what I did right instead of my mistakes? I feel lost without you. I can't stop crying. I feel like my life is over. You can make us both better. Just forgive me this once. I swear it won't happen again. I left the room without responding. At the door, I turned and said, Penny, get a lawyer. I want to get this over with and start fresh. I drove home and saw Tanya again as I walked onto the porch. Hey, Donnie, wait up, she called out. I sighed as she crossed the yard. She was dressed in old denim shorts and a sweat-soaked t-shirt, clearly having forgotten or skipped wearing a bra. I need to tell you a couple of things, she said. Tanya wasn't as slender as Penny or Judy, but now that I was no longer with Penny, I noticed her more. Why are you looking at me like that? She asked. Sorry, I said. I shouldn't have. I just wanted you to know Rick and I are here for you. If you need anything or just want to talk, we're here. Rick's still shaken from being mugged, and talking might help him too. You know, helping others can make you feel stronger, but that's not what I meant, she added with a smile. You know I'm married, and you're not that kind of guy. I smiled weakly, thinking about telling her the truth about Rick, but I realized it would only hurt her. Besides, Rick was probably trying his best to be the husband she deserved after what happened. There was no need to make things worse. Donnie, it's a cruise, she continued. One of our clients is organizing a singles cruise, and there are still cabins available. 10 days of fun in the sun might help heal a broken heart. Who knows? You might even meet someone. I'll think about it, Tanya, I said. But I don't think I should date anyone until my divorce is finalized. You're a good guy, Donnie. Whatever Penny did, I hope she realizes how foolish she is. Let me know about the cruise, okay? I did everything I could to make things right with Penny. My lawyer handled the divorce, and I went on with my life. I asked my boss to transfer me to another location and explained why. A few days later, he arranged for me to move to our Phoenix plant, which had been interviewing engineers. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start, warm weather, and the chance to drive my car year-round. I would leave everything and everyone behind, but that's what starting over is all about. I told Judy about my plan to leave the neighborhood, and she was upset, but understood my reasons. She agreed with me, feeling similarly as she processed Ed's end of life and her daughter's betrayal. She had been considering moving to New York to live with her sister and mother, and after our conversation, she started seriously thinking about it again. I made her promise not to tell Penny about my plans. "Honey, I don't have to," Judy said. "That girl is obsessed with you. She spends most of her time following you around, terrified you'll find someone else. She was furious when she saw you talking to Tanya on the porch, called her every name in the book and cried for hours. She's terrified you'll fall for Tanya and tell her everything, then end up together." "It's not that far-fetched," I replied. "True," she said. "Donnie, you really love my daughter. I could see you trying to figure out how to get her back the other day, but I'm glad you couldn't. She's my baby, and I love her, but I love you too, Donnie. We both know what she's like. At least when this is over, you'll have a friend in Arizona, and I'll have someone in New York." "Promise me we'll stay in touch," she said. "I don't have a choice," I said. "I've only loved 2 people, and one doesn't love me back. You're all I have left." I appreciated Judy telling me about Penny following me. I started keeping an eye on her whenever I went out. One night, I went to a movie and saw her watching me in the parking lot. I decided to have some fun. I pretended to wait for someone, bought a ticket through the app, and then called Judy to let Penny know I had a date. Penny stormed out of her car and headed toward me, but I quickly went inside, got my ticket, and slipped into the theater just as she arrived. She couldn't find me, and with 15 movies playing, she had no idea which one I was watching. 2 hours later, I walked out and pretended to say goodbye to someone. Penny appeared furious. "Cut the crap, Donnie," she snapped. "You went to the movies alone. I've been following you since you left." "Get used to it, Penny," I said. "I won't always be alone. Sooner or later, I'll meet someone I want to be with." "You've already met her, dummy." "She looks just like me," Penny said. "You just need to get over my one little mistake." I laughed and walked away, realizing Judy was right. I trusted Judy not to tell Penny my plans, but I still needed to leave town without Penny knowing where I was going. The solution came from an unexpected source. The next day, I heard a knock at the back door. When I opened it, there stood Rick, looking as nervous as ever, like he didn't belong there. Tanya was watching from their porch, smiling. "I didn't want to come," Rick said, "but she made me." He glanced over my shoulder at Tanya. "Come on in," I said loud enough for her to hear. "I did everything you asked," he said nervously, "and I'm grateful you didn't tell Tanya. But if she hadn't made me come, I would have called you anyway. We have a problem." "We don't have anything in common," I replied. "True," he said, "but we both want to protect Tanya. And we both have issues with your ex. Penny's threatening to tell Tanya everything unless I help her get you back. She says it's not fair for one of us to keep our marriage if we've both been cheating. She's blackmailing me into spying on you and pressuring you to take her back." I just stared at him, realizing I could use this situation to my advantage. "Rick, do it," I said. He looked at me confused. "Does Penny know about the cruise Tanya organized for me?" I asked. "I don't think so," he replied. "That's your info to give her," I said. "Tell her about the cruise. It'll keep her occupied for a while, especially if you suggest there's a chance we might talk on the ship since we'll be stuck together." "All right," he agreed. "I'll do anything to save my marriage." "Good, you can go," I said. The next day, Tanya called me. "Donnie, Penny somehow found out about the cruise. Should I book her on the wrong one or put her in a room close to yours?" she asked. "Tanya, make her pay full price," I said. "You'll be helping me more than you know." "Are you two back together?" she asked. "No chance," I said. "But why? What are you so mad about?" "She cheated on me, Tanya," I said sadly. "I walked in and caught them. There was no mistake. We're done. I just need to get away." In the following days, I prepared for the move, looked at houses, contacted moving companies, and called the new office in Phoenix. I still talked to Judy every day, but the saddest day before I left was when Judy moved to New York. I stopped by to say goodbye, and Penny was there. She had been so busy preparing for the cruise that she hadn't followed me around lately. She smiled as she opened the door. "I miss you so much, honey," she said. I ignored her and went straight to Judy. She hugged me tightly. "I wish you'd hug your wife like that, not my mom," Penny said. "It's probably good mom's moving to New York. I think you're confused about who you care about." Judy and I laughed. Penny was taking Judy to the airport. I said goodbye and promised to call Judy every day. "I wish you'd call me," Penny said. "You know you're wasting your time with this divorce. By the time we get to court, you'll forget why you wanted it. I noticed you withdrew a large amount of money from our account, but I didn't say anything because I did the same. Funny coincidence, huh?" I just walked away. She was so happy, acting like we were going on a second honeymoon, not realizing we'd be on the same cruise but not together. The thought of me being with someone else on the cruise never crossed her mind. 3 days later, I was ready to leave. Tanya had everything set up for the cruise. Just before the ship left, I called Penny. "Penny, I won't be home for about 10 days, I told her. "If you need anything about the divorce, talk to my lawyer." "Thanks for letting me know," she said cheerfully. "Maybe when you get back, you won't want a divorce. Maybe something will remind you how much we need each other." "Not likely," I said, laughing. She laughed too. "Is it so hard to admit you still love me, Donnie?" she asked. "No, it's not," I said. "I still love you. I just want you to love me enough for me to be enough." "I do, you fool," she said sadly. "I've realized life without you isn't worth it. Yes, I made a mistake. But it wasn't about love. Something drew me to Rick, and I don't even know what it was. Maybe we'll figure it out in therapy." "If you like old sayings," I said, "have you heard you can't fight nature?" She looked at me strangely and sighed as I hung up. 6 hours later, the ship was at sea, almost out of cellular range, when my phone rang. I looked at the screen and smiled. Watching the scenery go by, I thought about how Penny might be looking out of her porthole. But I had a window. "Where the hell are you?" she shouted. "I've searched the whole damn ship and you're not on it." "Who said I was?" I laughed. "How can we get back together if we don't spend time together?" she yelled. "You won't let me come home. You don't touch me and you barely talk to me. I'm going crazy. I love you, Donnie." "Okay, Penny," I said. "After the cruise, you can come home, but we won't sleep together." "I'll do whatever it takes to get back in your bed and heart," she said, her voice shaky. "I love you, Donnie." The call went silent, and I laughed as I crossed into another state. I decided to call my only friend. "Hi, Judy," I said when she answered. "Donnie," she squealed. "It's been so long since you called." "Almost 4 hours," I joked. "I think I made a mistake," she said. "Do you know what it's like living with 2 stuck-up old women?" I started laughing. Judy always lifted my spirits. "Stop lying, Judy. Everyone loves being around you," I said. "Donnie, do you know what time it is?" she asked. "They say time heals all wounds," I replied. "They're wrong," she said seriously. "I forgot how much I didn't get along with my sister. She and Mom are so alike now that I don't fit in." I laughed again. "Do you check your rearview mirror to make sure you're not being followed?" she asked. "It's hard to keep up with a truck when you're on a ship," I said. She laughed. "I won't ask how you got on the ship without her." "Remember the cow weapon commercial?" "I had my own ancient Chinese secret," I said. "I love that commercial," she said. "Guess I should go make Mommy's tapioca. Drive safe, honey." I arrived in Phoenix the next afternoon. The first thing I did was unload my Mustang into the garage. I was relieved it wouldn't face cold winters again, even if I didn't think about the heat and potential sun damage. Over the next few days, I settled in and got everything set up in my new home. The house was beautiful, but it didn't feel like a home, just a place. The day before I was supposed to start my new job, my cell phone rang. Without looking, I picked it up. "Where are you?" she hissed. "Why is all your stuff gone? You said I could come home and now the house is empty." "You're home, aren't you? Isn't that what you wanted?" I said. "You know that's not what I meant," she hissed. "I don't want an empty house. This is almost as bad as the divorce you're pushing for." "Don't worry about the divorce," I said. "Without proof, my lawyer told me I was screwed. I was at your mercy, so the divorce over your affair with Rick is off." "Good," she said, relieved. "Now where are you? I'll come to you." "I filed again," I said. "This time, I'm not going to be so nice." She laughed. "Does it matter why you filed?" "Call your lawyer, Penny. He already has the papers. Not only will I get the divorce, but I'll also leave you with almost nothing. And by the way, I'm changing my number tomorrow." An hour later, Penny called back. "Okay, Donnie, you win. I signed the papers. How did you get the video?" "I hired a private investigator to take my place on the cruise. I knew you'd act on your desires if I wasn't around. I set you free. I never even watched the video." "Thank you for proving me right about you, Donnie." "I can change," she said. "I don't think you can," I replied, "and honestly, you shouldn't. You're free now to do whatever you want. I'm free too, to find someone who'll love me the way I need. Donnie, you don't understand, she cried. It's me. My father loved my mother more than anything, but he still cheated. It didn't mean anything. It was just Zex. They were in love, and that's why she couldn't let him go. You and I are the same. You'll miss me, and when you do, I'll be here. But I'll make you regret putting me through this. 3 weeks later, I was still calling Judy daily. I noticed a sadness in her voice. Okay, Judy, what's wrong? I asked. I'm fine, she said. Just a little out of sorts. Judy, don't take this out on someone who doesn't know you. Tell me what's really wrong. Donnie, moving here was a mistake, Judy said. I spent most of the money from selling the house on taxes and improvements, and now I'm stuck. I only have Ed's pension, which covers my expenses, but it's not enough to move again or buy another house. I thought moving in with family would be great, but I guess I just didn't want to be alone after 20 years of living with someone. At least you still have family to live with, I said. Oh no, she replied. That's not an option. You have no idea what Penny's been up to since you divorced her. No, I don't, I said. But I wasn't talking about her. Why don't you come live with me? I have plenty of space, and I'd love to have you. Donnie, are you crazy? She asked. I can't live with you. You're my daughter's ex-husband. Not anymore, I said. Come visit, and if you don't like it, you can always go back to New York. Okay, she agreed. How about a week's visit? I want to make sure you're okay. I've been visiting Penny in your old house. Well, do you recognize it? Judy came to stay with me for a week, and she had so much fun that she didn't want to leave. We did everything together, sightseeing, shopping, and turning my house into a home. By the end of the week, I dreaded her leaving. The morning she was supposed to go, she made me breakfast and asked why I looked so down. Our week's over, I said. I'm going to miss you. Can you come back soon? No, she said. And honestly, Donnie, I don't think you really want me to. Judy, you're my best friend. Of course I do. Don't you want to come back? No, she smiled. Because if I come back, it means I left. And I don't want to. I smiled and hugged her tightly. We both knew something was happening, but neither of us was ready to admit it. The next morning, she made me breakfast again. I can't send you to work on an empty stomach, she said. And I'm taking you to work today. I need the car to go shopping. Are you sure you don't want to drive the truck? I asked. She stuck out her lower lip and held out her hand. For some reason, it didn't bother me to let her drive my Mustang, something I never let Penny do. I handed her the keys, and her smile made my day. After breakfast, we drove to my office. I expected her to leave, but she came in with me, looked around, and even met my secretary. Then she led me to my inner office. So why haven't you slept with her yet? She teased. She's not my type, I said. Judy laughed and said she'd pick me up after work. That evening, we grilled steaks and watched the sunset. I noticed she hadn't just gone shopping. She'd also decorated the house with little touches that made it feel more like home. Over the next few weeks, things progressed slowly but steadily. We spent evenings together, taking long drives, photographing landscapes, going to movies, or trying new restaurants. But most of all, we enjoyed quiet nights at home. I often suggested we go out because I was afraid of what might happen if we spent too much time alone together. About 5 months later, on Judy's birthday, I wanted to make it special. I bought her a diamond necklace and made reservations at a fancy restaurant. We had a wonderful dinner, and a violinist serenaded us with "Happy Birthday." When I gave her the necklace, her eyes lit up and she asked me to put it on her. As I did, I noticed her smiling and pointing behind me. I turned and saw the waiter standing there ready to serve us. The waiter said, "I was just saying, sir, that your wife is the most beautiful woman here." "You're right about that," I replied. "Donnie, you should thank him, silly," Judy giggled. "Or at least correct him. He thought we were married." "I couldn't thank you enough," I said. "That would mean I had something to do with you being so beautiful. And I didn't correct him because I don't mind if people think we're married. Ready for dessert?" "Yes," she said. "Can we take it home and eat it there?" Hearing her call it home instead of your house warmed my heart. When we got back, it felt like the perfect end to a wonderful night. It was strange, but at 30, I realized I didn't need anything else to be happy. When we got home, we made love, then showered and collapsed into bed. "I love you, Judy," I said. 5 months, she said. "I can't believe we've been doing this for 5 months." "We wouldn't have lasted this long if we were the type to just jump into bed with someone," I said. "Maybe not," she laughed. "But we're both the type to love deeply and exclusively." The next night, when I got home, dinner was ready, and she had something else planned. I wanted to make sure last night wasn't a fluke, she laughed. We made it a rule not to mention Ed or Penny. The past was behind us, and we focused on the future. We had so many good times together that there was no room for the past. We did a lot of things together for the first time, but we never talked about marriage. It just never came up, even though everyone assumed we would. That was until the past caught up with us. Our mistake was moving Judy's belongings from New York to Phoenix. Penny went looking for her mom, and her grandmother and aunt, unaware of the situation, gave her our address. That's when the trouble started. One Saturday, I went out to buy supplies for a barbecue. While I was gone, Penny showed up at our porch. Judy had no choice but to let her in, hoping I'd be gone long enough to get rid of her. Penny quickly realized Judy wasn't living alone and that her housemate was likely a man. Judy confirmed it and agreed to meet her for breakfast the next morning. Penny drove off, but got lost and saw my car on her way out. Judy decided to wait until we had relaxed a bit before telling me the bad news. As we were grilling steaks and getting ready to relax, we noticed someone peeking over our 6-foot fence. Penny's eyes went wide and she started screaming. We let her in. "I can't believe you two," she yelled. "Especially you, Mom. What would Daddy think?" "Penny, we're not married anymore," I said. "So what are you doing here?" "I came to find my mother," she said. "I was hoping she knew where you were. I need help." "What kind of help?" I asked. "I've lost almost all the money you left me, and I'm about to lose my house. I was hoping you'd give me another chance. I realize how stupid I was," she said sadly. "I'm sorry, Penny, but there's no chance," I said. "You can't fight nature." "Yes, you can," she insisted. "If you want it badly enough, you can do anything. I swear I've changed." "I was talking about Judy's nature and mine," I smiled. "It's in our nature to fall in love and stay that way forever. We can't fight it. But since you're our daughter, we'll help with the house. Go home and I'll put some money in your account, but you'll need to get a job." "Why can't I stay here with you?" she asked. "Penny, just being around you reminds me of what you did, and it makes me angry all over again. That's why I left town. Do you want the money or not?" "Of course," she said. Then she looked directly at Judy. "You don't want me here, do you, Mother? You know that if I had a fair chance, you'd lose. Donnie only agrees with you because he thinks he loves you, but really, he still loves me. He stays with you because you're just like me, and he knows you won't cheat on him." Judy and I both laughed. We'd already talked about our pasts enough that Penny's words didn't bother us. I preferred Judy's kindness over Penny's any day, and Judy appreciated that I only had eyes for her. Penny left the next morning, still angry that we hadn't let her stay, but it would have been inconvenient. Judy and I were happy with how things turned out. We both wanted to be alone together, and in some way we felt what happened to Penny was our fault. But we were content with our decision. Later, we learned that Penny had slept with several men in our neighborhood, including some of our friends, which caused a lot of gossip. One morning, Tanya saw a couple of men leaving the house and confronted them. That's how she found out everything. When she told them they should be ashamed of embarrassing their wives with the neighbor's mistress, they told her to mind her own business and suggested she watch her own husband instead. They hinted that's why I divorced Penny and left. Tanya confronted Rick, who broke down and admitted his guilt. 2 days later, as Penny was packing her suitcases, she had a strange feeling. Just as she was about to call one of the guys, she noticed Tanya sitting in the dark. "I always thought we were friends," Tanya said, tears in her eyes. "We are," a shocked Penny replied. "You had it all, Penny. A beautiful home, a good life, and a husband who adored you. Why wasn't that enough?" Tanya asked. "I never thought he'd find out," Penny said. "I love him, but I couldn't control myself. It's just something in me, like my father." "I guess you can't fight nature when that kind of desire takes over," Tanya said, and then she shot Penny. Tanya called emergency and waited for the police. It was ruled a crime of passion, and Tanya was sentenced to 8 to 15 years. Rick vowed to wait for her and visit every week. Judy and I got married after Penny's end of life. We realized we were all each other had. There were articles about us, especially because it's still rare for a woman in her 40s to carry twins to full term. We didn't name them Penny and Ed, as we kept our rule of leaving the past behind. Judy and I often visit Penny's grave and talk to her. It's sad and tragic when someone dies, and we don't wish that fate on her. Although neither of us had anything to do with her end of life, we both feel some guilt. Both Ed and Penny were sufferers of their nature. It's poetic in a way that Penny couldn't learn from her father's mistakes and met the same fate. I guess you really can't fight nature. And despite everything, We did live happily ever after. Up until that day, my life felt stable, grounded in a routine built over years of dedication and commitment. I had a solid job, a family I deeply valued, and a quiet sense of pride from the hard work I'd put into building a life I thought would never fall apart. Everything felt secure, my days centered around my wife, Marcy, and our 2 sons, the world I woke up to each morning. Looking back, though, maybe that stability made me naive, convincing me that what I relied on could never change. But life, I learned, has a way of delivering shocks that can upend even the most certain expectations. This realization didn't creep up on me gradually. It struck in a single, unforgettable moment, reshaping my world instantly. It sounds like an old story, but it really happened. I wish I could tell it in some elegant or dramatic way, but there's no dressing it up. Discovering my wife's affair felt like a worn-out cliché coming true. As for my job, I work in an auto parts plant, handling brakes, a necessary if thankless task. And yes, fate played its hand that night. From 4 to midnight each day, 5 days a week, I operate one of the oldest machines you've ever seen. I wear safety goggles, earplugs, steel-toed boots, and a denim apron. I hit my quota daily and, if I'm lucky, earn a year-end bonus. I have a modest, comfortable house with 3 bedrooms, a lovely wife, and 2 sons in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, everything seemed fine. Until today. We have 5 stations where we assemble brake pads, all running on compressed air. For 8 years, we've had no issues with the equipment. Today, halfway through the shift, the compressed air system failed. The air powering the machines needs to be perfectly dry, filtered, and dehumidified by equipment that almost never fails. Almost. Tonight, the dehumidifier couldn't release the moisture it collected. I'm no expert, but I know that moisture and high-pressure air together cause freezing, and everything stops. Instead of waiting around, they sent the whole team home, without pay, of course. You could say my life unraveled because of that trapped moisture. When I opened our bedroom door, I saw a large, hairy back moving up and down on my wife. Marcy, of course. I instinctively turned on the light, and Marcy was wide awake. "Damn it, Danny, what are you doing here?" she snapped. I thought she'd be afraid, remorseful, embarrassed. But all I got was anger. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. "Oh, don't act like an idiot. You know exactly what's going on," she retorted. "I'm sorry you had to see this, but if you'd come home on time, this wouldn't have happened." The guy looked back at me and smirked. Marcy pulled up the blanket, trying to cover herself. My big mistake was grabbing this guy when he got out of bed. He was a lot bigger standing than lying down. My reward was 2 very hard punches to the ribs. I didn't manage to land a strike and ended up on the floor, struggling for air. I think it was around then I took a punch to the head that sent me over the edge. Later, in the ER, a technician was bandaging my ribs while Marcy sat nearby, looking disgusted. After the tech left, I turned to her. "Marcy, who the hell is this guy, and what was he doing in our house?" I demanded. "His name's Tony," she replied calmly. "He's my friend, and I invited him over." "You slept with him? In our bed? With our kids just down the hall?" "Yes," she said, unfazed. "And if you hadn't made such a scene, they'd still be asleep. I had to call my sister to watch them just to bring you here." "What was he doing there?" I pressed. She rolled her eyes. "How many times are you going to ask that? We had sex. We fooled around. Is that really so hard to understand?" "Is this a regular thing or a one-time deal?" I asked, barely holding it together. She hesitated, then admitted, "Tony and I have been together for about 6 months. We tried to keep it from you. We usually don't come to the house, but I couldn't find a babysitter." I struggled to keep my voice steady. "Is it over now?" "No, Danny," she said bluntly. "This isn't ending. You're a good dad and husband, but Tony's great in bed. There's no reason to stop just because you know now. We just won't meet at the house again. It's unfair to you and the kids." I stared at her, stunned. "Marcy, this is unacceptable. We're done. If you try to break this off, you'll regret it," she warned. "Tony knock you without breaking a sweat, and he'll do it again. If you act up, everyone will know your wife's with another man, and you're too weak to stop it. Friends and neighbors will know first. I'll make sure your family knows what a loser you are. Your coworkers will call you a betrayed man. Think it over, Danny. Even your sons might hate you. Do you really want that? Do you want to look like a fool just to humiliate me? I'll make sure that happens. Tony thinks you're a wimp. So do I. You'll have to learn to live with it, Danny. Who is this guy? I demanded, barely containing my anger. Where does he work? He doesn't work, Danny, Marcy replied with a hint of condescension. He owns Continental Classics, the luxury car dealership on Lancaster Pike. You know, the one you always wanted to check out but never got around to. He's richer, smarter, and better in bed than you. And apparently, he's stronger too. Why don't you just marry him if he's so perfect? I shot back. She smiled coolly. That's why I keep you around, honey. Tony doesn't like kids, and I'm not giving mine up for him. So you get to play dad, and Tony gets the romance. And I'm just supposed to go along with this? I asked, incredulous. Her expression hardened. You don't have a choice. You can accept it, or everyone will know what a pathetic loser you are. By the way, I'm moving your things to the guest room. Now that the secret's out, there's no reason for us to share a bed. As she got up to leave, part of me felt relieved, but curiosity nagged at me, so I asked, So, who watched the kids while you were out with Tony? Karen usually did, she replied casually. Sometimes I drop them off at your parents'. And by the way, it was Karen who introduced me to Tony. I made a mental note to thank Karen as Marcy left the room. I was discharged the next morning, but Marcy wasn't there. At that point, I had a choice. Call someone for a ride or take a taxi. I chose the taxi. The kids were in school, and Marcy was out. I found my clothes and personal things stacked on the guest bed. I figured Todd and Terry would have questions about all this, so I decided to let Marcy explain it to them. It took me less than an hour to settle into my new space, though my mind was racing. There was no way I'd let this end the way Marcy planned. My first move was to head to the basement and dig out my old phone recorder. It only worked with a landline, but I didn't have any other options. Marcy usually called on her cell, but it only took 20 minutes to set it up and hide it behind some paint cans. Step 1 was done. I felt lousy, but I was ready to get back to work. I took some Tylenol instead of the stronger painkillers they gave me, since I didn't want to operate the machine while medicated. Marcy had seriously misjudged the level of support I had from the guys at work. I told them everything that went down last night, and they all pitched in with ideas, some useful, some ridiculous. It felt good to know they had my back. We started our 8-hour shift, each of us brainstorming ways to set things right. By our dinner break, we were deep into planning. All right, anyone got a solid idea? Glenn kicked things off. Not really, but I do have a cousin who works for that idiot, he said. He does detailing on the cars. From what he's told me, he hates DeMarco. He could probably give us the inside scoop on the place, like business details, layout, or shifts. That'll help, Glenn. Anyone else? I looked around. Danny jumped in. I have 2 rifles and 2 pistols. I could lend you one of each. They're all unregistered, so nothing to worry about. Thanks, Danny, but that's a bit more drastic than I'm aiming for, I replied. Well then, you probably won't want to hear my idea, Freddie said with a chuckle. Go on, Freddie, spill it. Freddie leaned forward, grinning. I say we tie him to a tree, legs spread, and light a fire Indian style right between his legs. Everyone got a kick out of Freddie's wild idea, but we obviously had to rule it out. Kyle, who had been quiet so far, suddenly had all eyes on him. What? Stop staring at me like that, he protested. You got any ideas? I asked him. Yeah, but it's kind of weird. Let's hear it, Kyle. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. I read about a prison in Arizona where they made PDF files wear pink jumpsuits. Must have been humiliating. I know Tony's not a PDF file, but something like that could embarrass the hell out of him. You mean dress him in a pink tracksuit? Couldn't he just take it off? I thought if we sprayed him down with pink paint, it'd really make a statement. Then he'd know who did it, I pointed out. We'd have to knock him out first and leave him tied up until someone found him. How do we do that? With pills or knock him out cold? Kyle shrugged. I could get a taser. Just sneak up and zap him. Easier said than done. How do we get close enough without him noticing? I don't know, but it's an idea, Kyle said with a sigh. The buzzer sounded, signaling the end of our break. We had 4 more hours left in the shift, and since my quota was low, the guys helped cover for me. When I got home, Marcy was already asleep. At least she'd kept her word about not bringing that clown into our house. But I still didn't have a real plan. Most of the guys' suggestions felt like high school pranks. I might as well put a flaming bag of dog poop on his porch. I needed something serious. By the time I woke up, it was noon. The kids were at school, and I heard Marcy moving around the house. I quickly showered, shaved, and headed out. "Good morning, husband. No kiss for your wife?" She was standing at the kitchen sink, hand on her hip with a smirk. I turned and walked out without replying. Her sarcasm didn't deserve an answer. I needed breakfast and some alone time. The rest of the day was just a matter of passing the time, trying to figure out how to deal with my wife's lover without causing a scene. I needed to finish my shift tonight and start planning. I decided not to eat at home anymore, which was my only real time with the kids. But I couldn't stomach Marcy's cooking now. Soon it was time to head to work. Everything went smoothly until the dinner break, when Danny leaned over saying, "I've got a taser in my car. Not sure if you can use it for anything, but at least you'd have it for self-defense." Kyle grinned, seeming pleased with himself. "Don't forget to pick it up before you head home." "Have you ever even used that thing?" someone asked, and Kyle smirked. "We can test it out. Any volunteers?" The only response was a chorus of groans around the table. No one had new ideas, but everyone was on board to support whatever I decided. It was a comfort to know I had friends I could count on. When I got home, the house was quiet. It was going to be a short night for me. Working the night shift throws off your sleep schedule, especially on weekends, so I woke up earlier than usual. Todd and Terry were thrilled for a day at Chuck E. Cheese, and Marcy didn't seem to mind when I told her we'd be out all day. Then she dropped the news. "Danny, I need you to take a few days off next week. Tony's friend Wally is coming down from Detroit, and we're taking a 4-day cruise to Cancun." "If you can't swing it, maybe your parents could watch the kids?" I raised an eyebrow. "Let me get this straight. You're going on a cruise with 2 guys? Even for you, that sounds pretty outrageous." She shot back. "Don't be rude, Danny. It doesn't suit you. Wally's rooming with Karen. They've been friends for years." "Oh, in that case, I guess it's perfectly fine," I replied sarcastically, already planning to thank Karen later. I'd started the day a little too early to pass the time. We hit the hobby shop next to our house before Chuck E. Cheese opened. The boys were old enough to tackle most of the plastic model kits on display. Their finished work was nothing fancy, but they enjoyed it. I left them exploring the shelves and wandered around, bemused by the endless craft supplies for creative types. If Marcy had been into crafts, maybe she wouldn't have brought home that hairy ape, but it was too late now. My eyes lit up when I saw rows of designer spray paint, including 6 cans of pink. The selection wasn't as big as Lowe's or Home Depot, but it was pink, the only place I'd seen that color in a can. Taking it as a sign, I bought all 6 cans. Todd picked out a monster truck kit, and Terry went with a tow truck. I didn't even know they made tow truck models. Before we left, I grabbed a pack of 10 large plastic cable ties about 18 inches long that looked perfect for what I had in mind. By then, Chuck E. Cheese was open. The kids spent about 4 hours and 2 pizzas worth of energy before calling it quits. We stopped by Pandora Park with some cheap bread for the ducks, who devoured it in 10 minutes, but we stayed a couple more hours before heading to my parents for dinner. Todd and Terry spent the evening watching TV while I pulled Dad aside to explain Marcy's situation. I realized I was telling people before she had the chance, almost making her threats meaningless. Dad assured me they'd be there to support the kids no matter what happened, which made my plans easier. I didn't want the kids caught up in all this. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to let her know we'd be staying at my parents' for the night. After breakfast at IHOP, we returned to find Marcy still in bed. I immediately turned on the lawnmower, making sure she'd hear it as I passed the bedrooms. Todd and Terry couldn't wait to start their model kits, and though it was a beautiful day, I let them go ahead. I spent the day on yard work, edging and trimming, but progress was slow because I kept stopping to chat with neighbors. I borrowed hedge trimmers from Mike Fielding across the street. His wife, Mary, was one of the neighborhood's biggest gossips, so I told Mike there might be strange cars around because Marcy would have her male friends over. I reassured him it'd be fine unless they got drunk and loud. In that case, he should call the police. I'd have a hard time controlling things since I work nights. Larry Finley, a church board member, lent me a spark plug wrench, and I apologized for Marcy's recent wild behavior. Naturally, he wanted details, and within 10 minutes, he had more than enough gossip to last him a month. I skipped lunch and wrapped up around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I treated myself to the most expensive meal at Rosie's Cantina. I'm not sure if it was worth the price, but it was delicious. I spent the rest of the evening with my brother Dave and his family, who were already up to speed on the situation thanks to Dad. I crashed on his couch for the night. Marcy thought she could control me by threatening to humiliate me as a betrayed man. If I didn't support her affair, she'd make my life miserable. It was a clever idea, but flawed. In less than a week, I'd already told everyone. That move neutralized her threat, making her look more approachable to others than she'd planned. I doubt she ever expected me to react this way. The following day, I arrived home to change for work, only to find Marcy waiting for me, furious. "What did you tell the neighbors?" she demanded. "Karen says you're going around telling people I run a brothel here at night." "Come on, Marcy," I replied. "That's not what I said. I just mentioned you might have male company when I'm working, so they shouldn't worry about it." "Well, that's not how it sounded to them. Who else did you talk to?" "Everyone," I admitted. "I figured it'd be easier to reach them before you did, but don't worry. I haven't mentioned anything to your parents or sisters. You might want to get to them before rumors do." "Damn it, Danny. You're making me look like a cheater." "Well, that's only fair, considering you were trying to make me look like a betrayed man." I glanced at my watch. "Sorry, dear, but I need to get to work." The hardest part for me was missing the quality time with my kids. Glenn gave me the best news of the night. Continental Classics closed at 9 o'clock on Thursdays, so Tony could handle payroll alone without interruptions. Not even the cleaning staff would be there. Kyle showed me how to use the taser, though no one had yet volunteered to test it. The plan was ready. I fully expected to get caught, maybe even do some jail time, but it didn't matter. Tony DeMarco needed to be humiliated, and if I was arrested, I'd make sure every news outlet knew the full story. That kind of publicity would wreck him, or at least make him angry enough to mess up. For the next few days, I only went home to sleep, shower, and change. I never ate at home after that first day. Finally, Thursday arrived. I arranged for my truck to break down so Kyle could give me a ride. The floor supervisor didn't bother those of us who worked at a steady pace, as long as quotas were met and quality was good. With the gloves, aprons, and welding goggles we all wore, OSHA regulations ensured we looked identical on the line. At 8:30, I slipped out the back. The guys took turns running my machine to keep up appearances. Bathroom breaks were frequent and never monitored closely, so no one would think twice about my absence. I entered Continental Classics through the service door and went straight to the restroom. Just after 9 o'clock, I checked the lights, then put on latex gloves and slipped into the dimly lit office. Tony's desk faced the showroom with his back to the door. It seemed easier than I'd anticipated. A computer was in front of him, but he was focused on an old adding machine, pounding away on the paper tape. He didn't hear me approach. I shot Tony in the back of the head with the taser. His body idioted, and he almost turned around, so I shot him again. This time he twitched a few times and then went limp. Perfect. I secured his legs and arms with 2 plastic ties each, then used an old tie as a blindfold. He was surprisingly pliable. I wheeled his chair up to the glass partition by the showroom, where everyone would see him first thing in the morning. The pink paint looked great, though I had to use a lot more than expected. It soaked into his clothes quickly, so it took 3 coats in each spot to get the look I wanted. I barely had enough paint, but I finished it. He looked quite striking in pink. Once I was done, I packed up carefully. I'd expected him to wake up at some point, but he remained still. I'd planned to remove the blindfold before leaving. I glanced at my watch a few times, but he didn't stir. After 5 minutes, I started to worry. I tried to find his pulse, but couldn't feel it through the latex gloves. Removing a glove, I checked his pulse again, this time at his neck, like they do on TV. Nothing. I took off the blindfold and tapped his eye lightly with a pencil. No reflex. Panic started setting in. I quickly put my glove back on and wiped down everything I might have touched. I pocketed the tie and cut off all the plastic ties. The unpainted lines on his skin gave him a raccoon look. After a final scan to ensure I hadn't missed anything, I slipped out. On my way back, I tossed everything, including the taser, down a storm drain. 10 minutes later, I was back on the line, assembling brake pads, unnoticed. When the shift ended, I filled the guys in on what had happened. They'd all been complicit, so I was confident no one would speak up. Freddie was especially impressed, and none seemed fazed. Kyle drove me home, both of us taking mental note of the drop-off time. I didn't sleep long. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy stormed into my room, her face twisted with fury. "What have you done? What have you done, you little fool?" she spat, standing over me. I rolled over and looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about? Tony's dead," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "Karen called and told me they found him in his office this morning. I know you had something to do with it, and I'll make sure you pay for this." That was the second time she'd called me a fool in less than 5 minutes. It was clear I wasn't going back to sleep, so I got out of bed and headed to the bathroom. Not in a hurry to face her wrath, I took a long, hot shower, shaved, and even splashed on aftershave, if only to irritate my loving wife a bit more. When I finally stepped out, I noticed a tall man in a dark suit with close-cropped hair standing in the living room, talking quietly with Marcy. She had definitely called the police. Shaking my head, I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. Marcy's smug expression didn't escape me as I sat down in my usual chair, while the visitor took a seat across from me. "Mr. Mercer, I'm Detective Darnell Green," he said, his tone formal. "I'm here regarding the pass away of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife mentioned a recent disagreement between you two, and I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Of course, Detective," I replied, nodding. "I have no problem with that, but not here." The detective raised an eyebrow. "What do you propose?" "If we're going to talk, let's do it in your office, not my home. Is that agreeable?" I glanced at Marcy, who looked distinctly displeased. She'd clearly expected to be part of this discussion. "Your car or mine, Mr. Mercer?" "I have an errand to run first, so I'll meet you there. Which office?" "Second floor in the back, room 206. Take a right off the elevator. I'll see you soon." Marcy shot me a furious look as I slipped on my shoes. I left my coffee half finished, dumped it in the sink, and turned to her with a smile as I headed out the door. "Looks like you'll get what you wanted, dear," I said. "What are you talking about, Danny?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "What does that mean?" 10 minutes later, I was sitting across from Detective Green in room 206 of the municipal building. For the next hour, he asked all the right questions and I had all the right answers. He was careful not to push too hard or make things personal, and I appreciated that. I admitted I had a motive, but explained that I'd never had an actual chance to act on it. It was a serious conversation, but I kept things friendly, without being smug. Detective Green seemed to appreciate my cooperation, and I felt like he had no further questions. The most surprising part was when he revealed that Tony had died from a heart condition. He'd had a pacemaker installed a few years back, which apparently hadn't reacted well to the taser. They'd identified the taser from marks on his neck. I was sorry about Tony's pass away, but a part of me was relieved. Detective Green gave me the standard "don't leave town" warning, mentioning that he'd confirm my alibi before speaking with me again. Honestly, I'd never thought I'd need an alibi for anything. It was oddly thrilling. We ended on good terms, and I felt like Darnell Green was on my side. The thought gave me a warm feeling. I grabbed some food and watched the news, where they reported the pass away of a local businessman, noting he had no known relatives. I emptied my bank accounts and took a leisurely breakfast. When I got home, Marcy was gone. It took me about half an hour to move all my things back into the master bedroom and transfer her belongings to the guest room. The small closet and chest of drawers were more than enough for her things, so I laid everything out on the bed for her to sort through. Checking the phone in the basement turned up nothing of interest. I gathered bank and insurance papers as well as other important documents, relieved that the Volvo Marcy drove was in my name. I stashed all the paperwork in a folder under the front seat of my truck, then called work to take 2 weeks off. A few hours later, Marcy came home, surprised to find me there. I smiled and led her to the guest room. "What's all this?" she demanded. "Who do you think you are?" I grinned widely. "Answer me, Danny, what's going on?" "Here's the deal, Marcy," I said calmly. "From now on, I'll be staying in the master bedroom, and you'll be in the guest room. I suggest you start putting your clothes away. Anything not in the closet or dresser by dinner will be removed. Any questions?" "I can't fit my things in this little closet, and I'm not staying here anyway," she snapped. "What do you mean by removed?" "If you can't fit it in the closet or dresser, you don't need it," I replied. "That's not happening, Danny," she said defiantly. "Whatever game you're playing won't work. You're dead meat." "I suggest you start organizing," I said, unfazed. "I'll be back later if you have more questions." "Fool," she muttered the third time that day. I had to be doing something right. With Marcy preoccupied, I went to the kitchen and emptied her purse, carefully picking out what I wanted. I took her phone, car keys, driver's license, and all credit and debit cards, leaving the rest. Grabbing the car papers from my truck, I drove her Volvo to a friend's used car lot across town. I sold it to him at a good price with the condition that he'd resell it outside the city. After paying off the remaining balance, I still had a few extra $1,000. I was just about to head to Taco Bell for lunch when my cell phone rang. "You fool!" she screamed. "What did you do with my cell phone? And where the hell is my car?" I was pleased she didn't call me a fool this time. She was calling from the home phone, which was a promising sign. I put on my most apologetic tone. "I'm so sorry, honey. I needed the cash to hire a lawyer to defend myself against liquidation charges. I promise I'll get you a new car as soon as I'm out of prison. When I hung up, still hearing her curse on the other end, I turned off my phone. After that conversation, I knew I needed a lawyer. Staying married was out of the question, but that would have to wait. I was next in line to order. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived, and I went straight to my son's room, ignoring Marcy except for a few glances. She didn't look pleased. The boys were eager to show off the models they'd built. As Marcy started on dinner, I wandered to the guest room, where my clothes were back on the bed, and hers had been moved to the master bedroom. I chuckled, but decided not to argue. She seemed set on her decisions. When Marcy called the boys to wash up, I went to gather my things from the guest room. Although I was tempted to toss out her belongings, that would be too petty. Instead, I made a reservation at Red Lobster. Money wasn't an issue. I had cash left even after putting down a retainer for the divorce lawyer. Dinner was good, especially the cheese buns. Just as I finished, my phone rang again. Hoping it was work or Detective Green, I was disappointed. It was my wife. "Danny," she said, annoyed. "How am I supposed to get to the store?" "We need milk and a few other things." "I'll take you when I get home," I replied, suggesting she plan trips for Saturdays when I don't work. "I'll feel better if you don't go alone." Before she could respond, I cut in, "They're calling me again. We'll talk later." I hung up. The second call was from Kyle. Detective Green interviewed everyone, individually and as a group. All the stories checked out. Tom Tingle, the floor manager, backed you strongly, said there's no way you could have left. "Tom kept us all under close watch," I replied. "He'd vouch I was there all night." But I knew if anyone wanted to prove I'd liquidated Tony DeMarco, they could, though it seemed no one was trying. I got home just in time to tuck the boys in. Marcy sat on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's from the fridge and took my seat. With the TV off, it seemed like a good time to talk. "So, Marcy," I started, "how's the plan to turn me into a joke going?" That ended things quickly. She drained her wine, stood up, and walked to her room. "I thought you wanted to talk," I called after her, but she disappeared. I took my beer and checked the answering machine. Her first call was to her sister Marge, who clearly knew about Marcy's affair with Tony and supported her completely. Good to know. The next was to her mom, who was clueless. Marcy painted Tony as a friend of Karen's and claimed I was jealous, saying Tony had scolded me for it, which made me angry. She didn't outright accuse me of eliminating him, but her mom seemed to pick up on that. Marcy also called the cell company, trying unsuccessfully to replace the phone I took. She reported her driver's license stolen to the DMV, who advised her to inform the police and requested a new credit card, only to find her account closed. Busy day, I thought. The last call was from Karen, who lived just a few houses down. They talked instead of meeting, which worked in my favor. I picked up two important details. Wally was still coming from Detroit, and Marcy planned to stay low until he arrived. The next morning, the guys and I left the house early, well before Marcy woke up. We got back after lunch, and Marcy insisted I take her to the grocery store since she didn't have a car or license. Later, as she prepared dinner, I checked the recorder. Wally had arrived and immediately called Marcy. They had an intense conversation. He believed everything she told him and wanted revenge for Tony. Wally and Tony were childhood friends, so he wasn't willing to let it go. He gave Marcy his address, asking her to call him the next day. Marcy excitedly shared the news with Karen, sounding like a different person from the woman I'd married. I couldn't believe how suddenly she'd changed. It was as if eliminating her lover had made me the enemy. That evening, I went out to grab something to eat, putting off dealing with Marcy. The lawn needed mowing again the next day, giving me an excuse to stay out of her way. Around 11, Marcy's parents arrived to take the boys for a sleepover, though I hadn't been told in advance. Grandma Wilcox assured me she'd have them at school on time, so I didn't object. I was eager to check my phone records, but decided to grab lunch first. After a quick shower, I went to see Dennis, while Marcy stayed silent about my not eating at home. It turned out Marcy and Wally had planned a way to avenge Tony's pass-away. If I didn't already know their scheme, it would have seemed almost laughable. The plan was for Wally to sneak into the house through the unlocked sliding door, and they'd make it look like a robbery gone wrong, where I'd end up shot. Marcy and Karen were supposed to call emergency if they heard fire shot. It struck me then that I hadn't changed my life insurance beneficiaries. After sarcastically kissing Marcy goodbye and getting a rude gesture in return, I spent the evening at my parents' and borrowed my dad's short-barreled snake charmer rifle, perfect for what I had in mind. When I got home, Marcy was already in bed with her light on, apparently reading. Karen's voice was the only one on the answering machine, boasting to Marcy about her day with Wally. She promised Marcy everything would be ready that night. I spent about 20 minutes swapping out the rifle shells with rock salt instead of buckshot. I had a leftover bag from last winter. I didn't want to eliminate Wally, just stop him. I got comfortable in my chair with my cell phone nearby and waited. Just after midnight, I saw Wally on the deck. I dialed emergency, reporting an intruder, saying I feared for my life, and left the line open. Wally slid the patio door open and stepped inside. Once he was fully in, I fired, aiming low. The shot threw him back out onto the terrace. A second shot struck him, and he fell off, breaking the railing. His screams confirmed he was still alive, though the rock salt clearly hurt. The shots were deafening in the house, my ears ringing. I turned on the lights, and Marcy came running into the room, yelling incoherently. Ignoring her shouts, I checked on Wally. A .22 Ruger with a silencer lay nearby. Marcy kept screaming until I pointed the rifle her way, and she quickly bolted from the room. Wally had broken his ankle in the fall. Seems he got lucky. 10 minutes later, a police car pulled up. I placed my tool on the floor to avoid any misunderstandings. Pointing to the phone, I watched as one of the officers informed the emergency operator that things were under control. They asked who else was in the house, and I mentioned Marcy was in the bedroom. They brought her out, but she unleashed a stream of curses that none of us could quiet. Finally, a large female officer took Marcy's hand and led her outside. I spotted Karen with the other neighbors and gave her a sarcastic gesture. She quickly turned away, lifting my spirits. The ambulance arrived for Wally just as Detective Green showed up. We exchanged smiles, and I couldn't help but grin back. The big officer brought Marcy back inside to get dressed, and after she calmed down a bit, we headed to the police station. I insisted we take separate cars, and Detective Green let me ride with him. We didn't speak on the drive, but Green gave me a knowing look. After a short talk at the station, he released me around sunrise. They'd kept me up all night with endless coffee. A patrol car took me home, where I was surprised to see no crime scene tape. It was as if nothing had happened. The rock salt didn't even crack the glass door. I guessed Wally had taken the worst of it. Exhausted, I fell asleep and didn't wake until afternoon. Heading into the kitchen, I was surprised to find Detective Green already there, reading the paper and drinking a coffee he'd apparently made himself. I poured myself a glass of orange juice and sat across from him, still wondering how he'd gotten in. "You're a tough guy, Mr. Mercer," he remarked, his eyes still on the paper. I kept quiet, unsure if he was serious or joking. After a moment, I excused myself to shower, shave, and grab a bite to eat. "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day," he called after me. I made 2 hefty sandwiches with pork, and when I returned, Green joined me, silently sipping a beer. We ate in silence until he finally broke it. "Got questions, don't you, Mr. Mercer?" he asked, glancing at me. "I'd say the same about you," I replied. He signaled for the waiter and ordered another round of beers. "We've been questioning you all night. Now it's your turn," he said, leaning back. "Fine. First off, where's my wife?" "She's still in custody. She'll be arraigned this afternoon." That caught me off guard. Did her parents get her a lawyer? I was careful not to reveal too much, though his answer raised more questions. "Good to know her family's there for her, because I won't be. If there's anything else you'd like to share, go ahead," I said, gauging his reaction. He chuckled and took a long sip. "One more thing. Ever record your wife's chats with Mr. Williams?" "You mean Wally? If I had a tape like that, would you want it?" "It could help," he replied. "Though we'll see. With a strong enough lawyer, maybe." "And would having that tape backfire on me?" I asked, considering his angle. "You're smart to think of that. Just trying to make my job easier," he said with a slight smile. "I'll see what I can do without a tape," I replied, giving a small nod. Green set his glass down and looked me in the eye. "Danny, it's time to take you home. Your boys need their dad." We arrived just as the bus dropped off Todd and Terry. They were excited to meet my detective friend and asked to see his badge. Green played along, asking, "So who built the tugboat and who built the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Todd said proudly. "I made the tug. Want to see it?" Terry offered. "Maybe next time," Green said, smiling as he walked to his car. As he left, I realized he knew more than he let on, especially about the pink paint. He had me exactly where he wanted, and I was helpless to change it. That evening, we ordered pizza, and the boys didn't ask about their mom. After dinner, Marcy's father called, asking for help to post her bail. I declined politely, sensing he didn't fully understand, but was trying to be supportive. When I asked where Marcy would stay, He said she'd stay with them. So the boys and I packed her things into the truck and delivered them to her parents' house without issue. Back home, I noticed a U-Haul at Karen's house, which was gone the next morning. Marcy never called, and I relied on the newspaper for updates. I learned there was no trial. Marcy blamed Wally, and he claimed it was her idea. In the end, they both pled for leniency. Marcy got 3 to 5 years for conspiracy, and Wally got 5 to 10 for attempted liquidation. Federal agents looked into the silencer Wally used, but decided to wait on further action. Detective Green never mentioned the tape again. Karen vanished without a trace. My father chuckled when I returned his rifle, offering it again if needed. I served Marcy with divorce papers as soon as she started her sentence. She didn't contest it. Since that night, I hadn't seen or heard from her. I sold the house and moved back with my parents, who helped me take care of the boys since I couldn't manage work and parenting alone. My coworkers welcomed me back, even offering me a day shift, which I turned down. I took the boys monthly to see their mother at Muncie Women's Prison, waiting in the car while they visited. In good weather, they met outside where I could see them, but never asked or talked about it. This arrangement suited us all. Then I got a call. "Hello, is this Daniel Mercer?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Daniel," I replied. "This is Angela Hawkins. Detective Darnell Green suggested I contact you. We need to talk." "Why do you want to speak with me?" I asked. "Tony DeMarco was my brother," she said. "Perfect. Just when I thought everything had settled, it all came rushing back." "I'm sorry for your loss, but I don't think I can help you," I said, hanging up before she could reply. 2 days later, she called back. "Daniel, could you meet me?" she asked. "Detective Green told me you're reasonable." "Where did you have in mind?" "I'd prefer a car dealership, but I'm flexible if there's somewhere more convenient for you." After a pause, I suggested, "Let's meet Saturday at 10 a.m. at the exhibition hall. I'll bring my sons. They enjoy looking at old cars." Not knowing her intentions, I felt safer meeting in public with the boys. I wasn't using them as shields, but I doubted she'd try anything with them around. She was Tony's sister, so I figured she'd be hot-blooded. Overthinking, I decided I needed a beer. I called Detective Green to ask what was going on. He laughed, telling me to relax and meet her. The Continental Classic was a large, impressive venue with an active opening celebration I hadn't anticipated. My boys were torn between admiring the cars and enjoying the free popcorn and sodas. Angela Hawkins was easy to spot. She approached with a steady walk, dark-haired, dark-eyed, and olive-skinned, with an unmistakably Italian look. At barely 5 feet, her build contrasted with her tall brothers. My curiosity stirred, but then I noticed her 10-year-old daughter, a miniature version of her mother. It was clear Angela was using her daughter for protection, just as I was using my sons. There we were, both relying on our children for a sense of safety. As she approached, she extended her hand with a friendly smile. "Daniel Mercer, I assume?" she asked. I shook her hand, finding it both polite and natural. "I've always wanted to say that, like in the movie about Dr. Livingston," she continued, her smile tinged with a hint of nervousness that oddly helped me relax. Before I could respond, she added, "This is my daughter, Carla." Todd smiled politely and introduced himself, while Terry extended his hand with a grin. "Carla, why don't you show the boys around while I talk to their dad?" she suggested. Carla took Terry into the showroom, and Todd headed straight for the hot dog stand, which I took as a good sign. Angela then offered, "We can talk here downstairs or upstairs in my office." "The office sounds fine," I replied. As we walked up to her office, I noticed several employees glancing our way, making comments and giving me thumbs-ups, which made me feel a bit self-conscious. Angela seemed to notice too, and she offered me a reassuring smile. "Did Detective Green fill you in on my situation?" she asked. I shook my head. "I won't bore you with my life story," she continued. "But Tony was my only family, and without a will, I inherited his business. The lawyer took a big cut, but I still ended up with more than I expected." Glad someone had gained something positive. I couldn't help noticing her wedding ring, her pierced ears, and a small silver cross around her neck. I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting. "Mr. Mercer, what are you looking at?" she asked, a playful smile on her face. Embarrassed, I replied, "I was admiring your crucifix, reminding myself to keep eye contact." She playfully tapped my hand. "How about a beer?" "That sounds like a good idea." Angela reached into a small fridge by the table, and as she bent over to grab some beers, I couldn't help but notice her figure. She handed me a beer, and we shared a moment of silence as we drank. "Well, Miss Hawkins, I said, breaking the quiet. I'm glad things worked out for you, but I'm not sure why I'm here. I should get back to the boys. Call me Angela. Can I call you Danny? She replied. Sure, but are we done here? No, just sit tight, she said, her expression turning serious. Detective Green said you'd understand. I remained silent, hoping she would get to the point more quickly. Tony was a fool, a worthless idiot who deserved what he got. Strange as it sounds, I wanted to thank you. I froze, wondering if this was a setup. Was the room bugged, or was she wearing a mic? I found myself glancing at her neckline again. Are you recording this? I asked. No, why would I do that? I still wasn't fully convinced, but took another sip of my beer. Maybe I should go check on the boys, I suggested. Sit down, she replied firmly. Tony and I weren't close. 3 years ago, my husband died in an accident, and Tony was my only family. I asked him for help, but all he did was cover a few funeral costs and then ignore me. So his pass away worked out for you? I probed. Yes, maybe it's helped you too. We can just be grateful and leave it at that. Angela finished her beer and smiled faintly. Then suddenly she added, I need your help. You're the only one who can do it. What do you need? I asked. I want you to be the general manager here. You're crazy. I don't know anything about luxury cars. I already have people who handle that, she said. Then why me? Angela hesitated, looking around. Did you notice how my staff reacted when you walked in with me? Yeah, I saw, I replied. They didn't even smile. They think you liquidated Tony, and they're terrified of you, almost respectful. Do you get what I'm saying? They don't respect you? No, they're undermining me at every turn, and I can't stop it. So what could I do? Just be here. With time, we'll both learn enough to control things, but until then, I need you to keep them in line. I'm a decent guy, Angela. That's why Tony and my wife thought they could manipulate me. She relaxed a bit and smiled. Didn't turn out so well for them, did it? Oddly enough, I found myself laughing too. Over the next half hour, Angela and I discussed the terms. She was more than willing to offer a salary and benefits that surpassed what I had at the factory. If things didn't work out, I could always return, but going back wasn't what I wanted. I wanted things to improve. Todd didn't look so well when we got downstairs. He'd had too many hot dogs and sodas. Terry, on the other hand, was having a great time, chatting more with Carla than looking at the cars. This was definitely a good sign. Todd got sick in the truck on the way home and missed dinner. On Monday, I started my new job. Everything went as Angela had said it would. I was surprised by how quickly I adapted. I made friends with several employees and began learning the operations. Glenn, who had greeted me with a big smile on the first day, turned out to be my biggest supporter. Most employees wanted the business to succeed and were happy to work without fuss. Angela let me start firearm training for security, and I found I enjoyed it. I was living up to my reputation. Detective Green stopped by for coffee now and then, mostly for light, friendly chats. Eventually, he shared a bit more about himself. 3 years ago, I was a cop in Philadelphia, he said. One day, I came home to find my wife in bed with my boss. I knocked him up right then and there and kicked my wife out. The department gave me a choice, quit or be fired. Within a week, I had a job here. But before I left, I made sure that the guy who slept with my wife got fired too. I didn't ask for more details. It was his business. But I could see why he had my back. The boys agreed not to tell their mother about my new job. During visits, they occasionally commented on the long drive, but they seemed to understand it wasn't optional. I felt it was important for Marcy to see her sons, not for her sake, but as a reminder of what she lost. I know, it was cruel to use my kids this way, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction. Angela and I began spending more time together at work and outside of it. One weekend, the boys insisted we take her and Carla to Noble Grove. Most of the time, we stayed close to home. Living arrangements made a romantic relationship difficult. I was interested in Angela, but it felt awkward. I was still living at my parents' with the boys, and Angela and Carla shared a small one-room apartment. With things going better than expected, Angela started looking into buying a house. She spent a lot of time online searching for the perfect place. One day, she called to explain why she wanted a 4-bedroom home. Danny, I think it's important for each of the boys to have their own room. Better to handle this now than later. Don't you agree? Of course. I instantly recognized the question had more to it. It was clear Angela saw me as more than an employee. This romance had potential. Yes, that sounds good. And maybe a split-bedroom plan would be wise. I'd rather the kids weren't too close to the master bedroom. After saying that, I left the office and noticed her smiling. Our relationship was unusual. We hadn't been physical engaged, not even kissed, but I felt closer to her than I had with Marcy in 12 years. 2 days later, when my divorce from Marcy was finalized, we celebrated at Red Lobster. The kids didn't know the reason, but Angela did. Later, while the kids were watching pay-per-view, Angela pulled me aside in the kitchen, stood on her tiptoes, and kissed me. We were laughing and hugging when Carla walked in. "Oops, sorry, Mom," she said, turning away. Guess it was about time. When we rejoined them, Carla whispered something to Terry, and they both smiled. Angela and I kept things reserved for the rest of the evening, but I looked forward to what was next. The following day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I took an extended lunch break and returned home, finally releasing all the pent-up energy. We got back to work just before closing. After that, long lunches became a regular thing, and Angela got serious about house hunting. Detective Green stopped by often, mostly to chat, though he occasionally glanced at the cars. He had developed a fondness for a Studebaker Hawk once owned by Roger Ebert, and Angela had offered him a good deal on it. "Danny, I need you to take me to Marcy," she said one day. Her request surprised me. The boys and I had been visiting Marcy less frequently, but she never seemed to mind. "Is there a reason?" I asked. "Unfinished business. I need to wrap it up," she replied. I still didn't fully understand what she meant. I grasped her words, but struggled to comprehend the underlying idea. "Do you want me to go in with you?" I offered. "Just drive me. You don't need to stay with me during the talk," she said. It was a warm, sunny fall day when we arrived in Muncie. The prisoner meetings were held outside, so I parked near the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela came out to the courtyard and sat at a table. They started talking and smiling, almost like old friends. But after 5 minutes, the mood shifted. Marcy's smile vanished. She stood up, leaning over the table, glaring at Angela, who still looked completely calm. Suddenly, Marcy lunged across the table, trying to grab Angela. Security quickly intervened, pulling Marcy back into the building as she kicked and yelled. Angela turned to glance at me, smiled, and shrugged before leaving the visitor area. She was still smiling as she got back in the car. "What on earth was that all about?" I asked, bewildered. "Your ex-wife is quite the piece of work," Angela laughed. We drove a few miles and she adjusted her seatbelt. I introduced myself, and at first she seemed glad to see me. Everything was fine as long as she thought I was on her side. I admit, I misled her a bit at first. "What did you say?" I inquired. I told her I came from Baltimore to get revenge. "She probably assumed you meant revenge against me," I guessed. "Exactly. I actually meant I was going to get even with Tony by taking over his business. I guess you can get revenge on a dead guy, right?" "Sure, but what made her so mad?" Angela asked. She started pressing for specifics like when and how. Obviously, she thought I was talking about you. Now I was curious. "So, what did you tell her?" I told her it would take a long, long time and asked if she wanted updates. She eagerly agreed, wanting every detail. But when I explained my plan, she lost it, just went wild. I laughed. "That's priceless. All right, so what's this plan to liquidate me? I'm all ears." Angela's smile widened. I told her I'd do it by having sex with you until you drop dead. "And that's it?" I asked, surprised. "Yep, funny, right?" I thought she'd get angry, but I didn't expect her to completely lose it. We sat in silence for a moment, both smiling. I couldn't have been prouder. "So when's this attack supposed to start?" I asked, grinning. "As soon as we get to the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Angela and I got married in a small backyard ceremony at our new home. Angela even sent Marcy an invitation with a little note inside. "Everything's going according to plan. He should be dead in 40 to 50 years."